with all that we have given them, we should own perhaps at least one half of this asset. The revenues generated because of it. And it's not, just take out the Obama race part. Why the fuck is the president of the United States hosting cartoons?
Stanley walked tall with a paperback brain.
Well, I don't know what it was, but the thing is that if you ever go and you kind of read these people's biographies, fearing his shoes, library brave. The MAGABlacks, you get a bunch of MAGABlacks. That's what you get out of it, President. You get MAGABlacks who will put. I'm a drunk old man with a head shaped like a shroom. And then the other thing we've forgotten is brevity. That's the main lesson I learned today. And I know I'm Stanley, bitch.
Paula, what's the reaction to President Trump's newest demands to Iran? What can you tell us?
Well, Ben, we're getting a lot of reaction from Iranian officials to that social media post threatening to target power plants and bridges with the expletives as well. Now, we've heard from the Parliament Speaker, Mohammad MAGABlack. He's really emerging as a very powerful voice in Tehran at this point, and he's accused Trump of pushing the US towards a living hell and warned that the region could burn. The Iranians have been saying that they will target in kind if there is civilian infrastructure targeted in Iran, in the Gulf region, and in areas where the US has interests. Now, we've also seen fairly tongue-in-cheek reaction from some of the Iranian embassies around the world to that outburst in that social media post. We've heard from the Iranian embassy in India saying swearing and throwing insults are how a sore loser brat behaves. Get a grip on yourself, old man. Now, there's also been criticism within the US. Chuck Schumer, for example, the Senate Minority Leader, calling Trump an unhinged madman from that expletive-laden social media post. We also had a response from the Foreign Ministry spokesperson. Let's listen to what he said.
Iran's reaction would be one of reciprocating any such attack. Our armed forces have made it clear that in case Iran's infrastructure is attacked, we would react in kind. Our armed forces would target any similar infrastructure that is owned or in any way or manner related to the United States or contributes to their act of aggression against Iran. Threatening to attack a country's critical infrastructure, energy sector, it would mean that you want to put at risk the whole population. And this is nothing less than war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Now, what we're seeing in Iran overnight and then this Monday morning with airstrikes from the US and Israel, from state media, we are seeing in Baharistan County, this is just southwest of the capital, a densely populated area. We see a number of residential buildings that appear to have been hit there. According to Fars news agency, they say some 13 have been killed. Then in the eastern part of Tehran, 4 killed in another residential area. Now, CNN cannot independently confirm these figures, but we are also seeing loss of life in Israel and elsewhere.
First of all, there are supposed to be some sort of diplomatic talks going on. Pakistan is leading them. I can't imagine they're going well if we're back to threats online.
Yeah, Pakistan is essentially acting as a shuttle for messages between the two. But look, the two sides are so far apart. And from Iran's perspective, why not wait for President Trump to crash into one of his own deadlines once again or move it onward? Iran wins at home. Public opinion is shifting against Trump and his war, and they win in the international community.
Yeah, though it's hard to know what's going on in Iran given their crackdown, right, as the regime tries to take hold. But to your point of them digging in, when I look at the responses from Iranian embassies from around the world, because this is all being done by social media, the one in South Africa says, seriously, think about the 25th Amendment, Section 4. In Bulgaria, didn't know they had an Iranian embassy. Take it easy, Tiger. In Austria, saying he, quote, stooped to an unprecedented level of begging laced with bitter, hollow rudeness and threats. The desperation is almost palpable. Sarah, can I come to you? Because they are speaking Trump's language in that they're doing it online. They're doing it in a very sort of memeable way. Can you talk about this response?
Yeah, well, one thing that's interesting, always I'm thinking about the audience. So when you have Donald Trump, who has millions of followers on X and is a big global personality, I think there's a lot of visibility in terms of what his message is, where his message is reaching. I don't think anyone in America knows that those embassies are tweeting at us.
Yeah,
right
nobody's laying in bed being like, what's Bulgaria saying?
No
Sorry,
clue. So
Bulgaria.
those threats sort of fall on deaf ears with the American public. What Senator Kaine was saying over the weekend is that when Donald Trump makes these types of threats, that doesn't fall on deaf ears. Even with the internet blackouts in Iran, when Donald Trump is saying something like that, the people in Iran are listening. And that matters because when you have a fighter who is being, crashing down in the mountains of Iran, sometimes you need the response of the people to make a decision about how they're going to react. Are they going to turn him in or are they not? And so I don't think that this is the exact same thing. When Donald Trump says something, it's a pretty big effing deal in his words.
Yeah.
When these embassies say something, I don't think that they have as much impact, even though they're trying to match that tone.
At one point, the president says, praise be to Allah. This is how Stephen A. Smith talked about it.
You go on social media with a profanity-laced tirade, and then you're going to end it by saying, praise be to Allah. How do you think that's going to help us? How do you think that's going to help us throughout the world? I mean, seriously.
One more for you, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has taken up a new religion, sort of anti-Trump at this point. She also was commenting because there's been a lot of conversation about how the Pentagon uses religious language. Yes. Anyway, so she was commenting. She says, everyone in his administration that claims to be Christian needs to fall on their knees and beg forgiveness from God and stop worshiping the president and intervene in Trump's madness. And then she says what we've heard a lot. This is.
Let me, well, welcome to Stanley versus the World, everyone. Happy Tuesday afternoon. Please make sure you hit the like button, especially if you're watching this on a replay. If you are new to the channel, please subscribe to it. Check us out. See how you like it. Funny enough, speaking of the Christian values part, Tucker Carlson has suddenly become interesting. We're going to see at least his opening monologue from a show he did. I think it was Sunday or Saturday or something. It might have been Monday or Sunday night. But anyway, yeah, even the Christian right is starting to go, well, what on earth is going on with this dude? So Tucker made some interesting comments.
It's not what we promised the American people when they overwhelmingly voted in 2024. Can you talk about either the messengers here or the message?
Well, peace does not seem to be at hand in Iran, I'd say that. And the events over the weekend just seems to embolden both sides to stick it out and see what happens next. We're not getting closer to a negotiated settlement. We're getting farther away from them. The rescue of the airmen, for which we were all grateful, was a demonstration to Trump about we can do whatever we want militarily and succeed, but at a great cost. And from Iran's point of view, that is a cost worth forcing the United States to pay again.
You know, one of the things I'm noticing now is Trump is talking about power infrastructure, going against that. And then I want to play one more thing for you. This is from some Israeli officials who are also talking about threatening infrastructure. It's Israel Katz, who's the defense minister.
The terrorist regime in Iran.
Ooh, that's Audi Cornish. Oh, man, I love that woman.
Continues to launch missiles at the Israeli home front, killing and harming Israeli civilians. If they continue firing at civilians in Israel, we will strike and destroy Iran's national infrastructure. We have severely damaged the steel infrastructure and the petrochemical industry. And today and every day, there will be more to come.
Before, there was a sense that the U.S. and Israel wanted to preserve something of Iran's infrastructure. Do I have that right?
Absolutely.
Is that shifting?
Absolutely. But I think we see it to the points that we've been making here in a quarter reckless way, in a way that's not really thinking strategically about what are going to be the ramifications of doing this. I was with a former NSC official over the weekend, and they were explaining that sometimes you choose not to strike certain targets because it's just not worth it. One, it might be a war crime. And in these cases, I think this is a very legitimate question to be having about what kind of information is Pete Hegseth getting about what targets they're choosing and what the legal, not just the legal ramifications could be, but the national security and the military ramifications. And
we're going to talk about Petey Hegseth too. MOT calls him Whiskey Pete.
I've spoken to so many officials who say, like, infrastructure like this for the whole population, when you are going to be turning off incubators for babies and things like that, that is a much, much more serious question to have. And that should be a topic of discussion with expertise. I think we're also seeing in this war kind of the death of expertise. Where are the experts who are coming in and saying, this may not be legal or this may not be the right thing? I don't think those people are getting.
And with that initial strike that landed on a school, there was like, oh, okay, maybe it's the early start. Now we're deep in. And you have even people like Ann Coulter saying online, I really wish legal experts hadn't screamed bloody murder about every little thing Trump did so they could with authority now that he's actually committing war crimes.
Yeah, Hegseth saying that see no quarter towards the forces, and also now talking about, there are international criminal court judgments against Russia for doing this in Ukraine. You can militarily, under the Geneva Conventions, hit some parts of the power grid if they're purely for military purposes.
Right.
But if you do it on an extended basis and you add in things like desalination plants, which is what Trump is threatening to do, that gets you straight into the territory of war crimes. The U.S. helped write the update of the Geneva Conventions after World War II to go against this kind of action.
And never mind that they're struggling with the Strait of Hormuz right now, right? So as you try to expand, knowing Iran will retaliate in every direction.
I view the responsibility of government.
All right, well, let us sally forth into the world of Trump. Yeah, you're having even actual more conservative people have a problem with this, because essentially, you go when you start screwing up infrastructure like that, you're just creating a humanitarian crisis. And, Ann Coulter has never been a huge Trump fan. In this bullshit about, legal experts decrying every little thing that Trump did. Little crimes, big crimes, presidents should not be committing any crimes, if they can help it. So that is actually a ridiculous point she made. So Trump has said a whole civilization will die tonight. What on earth? I don't think I ever even thought a president would say something like that. So he's going to kill 2,500 years of culture. What is he going to do? Target all the museums, the art galleries, the music halls? What is he talking about? So let's listen to a little bit of this.
Washington, April 7th, Reuters. U.S. President Donald Trump once again exhorted Iran to make a deal by his Tuesday deadline, saying a whole civilization will die tonight if an agreement is not reached to end the conflict. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will, Trump said in a post on Truth Social. We will find out tonight. one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. Reporting by Susan Heavey and Bhargav Acharya. Editing by Doina Chiaku.
Yeah, so now he is going to play God. How does that work? How do you go and decide to make a culture extinct? Talk about white supremacy gone wild. God damn. So Iranians voice shock and defiance in face of Trump's latest deadline. Yeah, this is President Trump has threatened devastating attacks if Iran does not reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Some Iranians questioned what had happened to what had happened to American values. You know, a lot of Americans have been asking that very same question of MAGA.
Iranians voice shock and defiance in face of Trump's latest deadline. This article is by Erica Solomon and Sanam Mahouzi and read by an automated voice. With President Trump's deadline to unleash mass destruction on Iran just hours away on Tuesday, Iranians face the threats with a mix of indifference, defiance, and bewilderment. Mr. Trump has vowed to level power and desalination plants, oil installations, and bridges if Iran does not reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a key oil shipping route, by 8 p.m. Eastern Time. The first thing that came to my mind is that I think Trump is under a lot of pressure and that he has lost his mind, said Lily, who works in the arts scene in the Iranian capital, Tehran. She asked not to use her full name out of fear of repercussions for speaking to foreign media. Mr. Trump renewed his threats against Iran's civilian infrastructure at a White House news conference on Monday, in which he hailed the American forces' rescue of 2 U.S. airmen whose jet was shot down over Iran on Friday. The entire country can be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night, he warned. Lily said she and her family had made no contingency plans at all, and they were not planning to flee Tehran. They were not stocking up on goods or bracing to hole up at home. We need to continue with our lives, she said, adding there was no apparent haven to flee to. Attacking infrastructure meant almost anywhere could become a target. Legal experts have argued that striking civilian infrastructure could be considered a war crime under international law. Iran apparently is emboldened by its shooting down of U.S. aircraft, as Mr. Trump appears to be by the daring rescue of the airmen, put forward its own proposals and demands on Monday to end the war. Mr. Trump called this a significant step, but one that was not good enough to change his announced deadline. Mohsen Bourani, a law professor at Tehran University, said that as he read through Mr. Trump's threats toward those the American president had called the crazy bastards running Iran, his first thought was of the founding fathers. In particular, he thought of the writings of Thomas Jefferson and the values that America was supposed to lead by, he said. I also thought about the global order established after World War II, centered around the United Nations and shaped under Roosevelt's leadership, he said, referring to former President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And I wondered how it is possible for a U.S. president to undermine and discredit all American values and 250 years of human legacy. Mr. Bourani, a well-known political commentator in Iran, said the Trump administration was still operating under a false assumption that enough military pressure could force Iran's authoritarian clerical rulers to surrender. Based on my understanding of Iranian society and governance, he said, I can state clearly that even several nuclear bombs would not achieve such an outcome. Lily, the Tehran resident, said that as someone who long opposed her government and sympathized with the nationwide demonstrations that sought to topple it just months ago, Mr. Trump's threats have shifted her feelings toward the United States and Israel. Both countries' leaders have repeatedly voiced support for Iran's opposition and encouraged Iranians to use the war to rise against their leaders. But their warplanes are now bombing not just military sites, she said, but critical industrial facilities, universities, and schools. So now we are supporting Iran and whatever government is running it, she said. Other Iranians made direct appeals to Americans to stop.
Yep. You don't want the civilian population to feel that they are the target. And this Trump guy, and actually his advisors, man, what the fuck are these people doing? Now you're gonna piss the people who could be potential allies off. These guys are untalented. So this is a longish article that I scanned through, and looks fairly interesting. This is basically Maggie Haberman and forget her partner's name, Jonathan Swan. They wrote like a book on the first Trump presidency, and they're working on a second book right now. And they have kind of pieced together a timeline. They've titled this story "How Trump Took the U.S. to War with Iran." And essentially, it says in a series of Situation Room meetings, President Trump weighed his instincts against the deep concerns of his vice president and a pessimistic intelligence assessment. Here's the inside story of how he made the fateful decision. One other thing, I can't help but think that some of this is because he didn't get a Nobel Peace Prize. I guess he said, fuck it. If I'm not gonna get a Nobel Peace Prize, I'm gonna get a Nobel War Prize. I'm just gonna go in and, these people are gonna feel my wrath. Should have given me that Peace Prize, damn it.
How Trump Took the U.S. to War with Iran. This article is by Jonathan Swan and Maggie Haberman and read by an automated voice. The black SUV carrying Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrived at the White House just before 11 a.m. on February 11th. The Israeli leader, who had been pressing for months for the United States to agree to a major assault on Iran, was whisked inside with little ceremony, out of view of reporters, primed for one of the most high-stakes moments in his long career. U.S. and Israeli officials gathered first in the cabinet room adjacent to the Oval Office. Then Mr. Netanyahu headed downstairs for the main event, a highly classified press.
I want to point out that they are meeting in the White House with Israeli officials. This is just, man, Donald Trump, this dude is just, what is he thinking? And if he's not thinking, what are his advisors thinking? When JD Vance is like, what the fuck are you doing? It's bad.
Presentation on Iran for President Trump and his team in the White House Situation Room, which was rarely used for in-person meetings with foreign leaders. Mr. Trump sat down, but not in his usual position at the head of the room's mahogany conference table. Instead, the president took a seat on one side, facing the large screens mounted along the wall. Mr. Netanyahu sat on the other side, directly opposite the president. Appearing on the screen behind the prime minister was David Bernea, the director of Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence agency, as well as Israeli military officials. Arrayed visually behind Mr. Netanyahu, they created the image of a wartime leader surrounded by his team. Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, sat at the far end of the table. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who doubled as the National Security Advisor, had taken his regular seat. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who generally sat together in such settings, were on one side. Joining them was John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, and Steve Witkoff, Mr. Trump's special envoy who had been negotiating with the Iranians, rounded out the main group. The gathering had been kept deliberately small to guard against leaks. Other top cabinet secretaries had no idea it was happening. Also absent was the vice president. J.D. Vance was in Azerbaijan, and the meeting had been scheduled on such short notice that he was unable to make it back in time. The presentation that Mr. Netanyahu would make over the next hour would be pivotal in setting the United States and Israel on the path toward a major armed conflict in the middle of one of the world's most volatile regions. And it would lead to a series of discussions inside the White House over the following days and weeks, the details of which have not been previously reported, in which Mr. Trump weighed his options and the risks before giving the go-ahead to join Israel in attacking Iran. This account of how Mr. Trump took the United States into war is drawn from reporting for a forthcoming book, Regime Change, Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. It reveals how the deliberations inside the administration highlighted the president's instincts, his inner circle's fractures, and the way he runs the White House. It draws on extensive interviews conducted on the condition of anonymity to recount internal discussions and sensitive issues. The reporting underscores how closely Mr. Trump's hawkish thinking aligned with Mr. Netanyahu's over many months, more so than even some of the president's key advisors recognized. Their close association has been an enduring feature across two administrations, and that dynamic, however fraught at times, has fueled intense criticism and suspicion on both the left and the right of American politics. And it shows.
Yeah, I'm going to just leave it right there. These articles and videos and stuff like that, I put the links in the show notes if anybody wants to get deeper. This is a long article. It's about 25 minutes long, and I don't know that it's worth going knee deep into. But needless to say, I don't know why we should be going to war in consultation with another country. It really, and I don't mean just Israel, I mean any country. Why would an American president even be taking a briefing on why we should go to war? This is going to come back to haunt. This is going to be a long-term damage control process, and this is a big "I told you so" to these MAGA blacks and just MAGA in general. These guys have just fucking created a monster, and Donald Trump is taking at least MAGA, if not Republicans in general, down with him. So people are basically starting to distance themselves from Trump. And this could basically be this. I think this is basically where Donald Trump's lame duck powerlessness starts. People aren't going to want to be associated with this shit. Even the MAGA blacks will be the last to jump ship. They will just go down with Donald Trump's MAGA boat. So anyway, Hegseth's boastful claims about Iran war contradict reality, and boy, howdy, don't they? I'm going to play a little bit of this. I was going to read it, but what the hell? Oh, wait, hold it. You know what? I forgot. Fucking commercials. All right, let's see here. So it says here, President Donald Trump has continued to describe the war against Iran as an unqualified success, saying as recently as Monday that the United States was doing unbelievably well. While Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Tehran has been embarrassed and humiliated by the U.S. I don't know about that. Having hung on this long, but Iran's downing of an F-15E fighter jet and the high-risk rescue operation that ensued showed that Tehran retains the ability to threaten United States military personnel and cast doubt on the statistics Hegseth has promoted in recent weeks, boasting about complete control of Iranian skies in uncontested airspace. Yeah, there goes that boastful statement. The chaotic but successful rescue mission has become the clearest indication yet that Hegseth's repeated claims of air dominance come with serious caveats and has reinforced concerns inside the Trump administration that his messaging about the war is overly optimistic and risks misinforming both the public and the president. Yeah, when you're going in and getting rescue helicopters shot up, that's not air dominance. I mean, basically, you're supposed to be suppressing the small arms fire and stuff like that. Pete is not speaking truth to the president, one administration official said. As a result, the president is out there repeating misleading information. Though Hegseth has claimed for weeks that Iran has no air defenses and could do nothing about U.S. air incursions, Trump acknowledged during his White House news conference Monday that a shoulder-fired, heat-seeking missile downed the F-15 that left two U.S. airmen temporarily stranded deep inside Iranian territory. He got lucky. It was a lucky hit. Yeah, okay. A heat-seeking missile hits a plane, and that's a lucky hit. Iran also shot down an A-10 attack plane Friday, though the pilot of that aircraft managed to fly it back to friendly airspace before ejecting safely. Kelly Grieco, a military strategist at the Stimson Center, said that while the Trump administration has significantly degraded Iran's Navy, Air Force, and fixed missile and radar targets, the F-15's downing is what happens when you have air superiority but don't have air supremacy. Our air superiority is limited geographically to the west and to the south, but also in terms of altitude, she added, noting that U.S. warplanes probably have been flying above 15,000 or 30,000 feet to avoid the type of shoulder-fired rockets that hit the F-15 Friday. Fuck around and found out they did. Hegseth's triumphant rhetoric has stood in contrast to that of General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who has not suggested U.S. pilots can use Iranian airspace without concern of enemy threats. Hegseth has provided the commander-in-chief with decisive military operations to achieve our clear, scoped objectives: destroy Iran's missile arsenal, annihilate their navy, destroy their terrorist proxies, and ensure Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon, he said in a statement. That's Dan Kane. They've flown like between Israel and the United States, they've flown 13,000 combat flights, and Iran can still shoot down a fucking F-15. Wow. One other thing, and I forgot to add this story. There's a reporter who was kidnapped in Iraq by some Iran proxy. So, the danger to American citizens is not just limited to, inside Iran. I'll see, can I find that story? So Zateo, which is Mehdi Hassan's outfit, kind of went in and compiled a full list of Trump's unhinged threats and lies just from yesterday, Sunday. It says here, at the White House Easter egg roll and behind the press room podium, the president managed to out-mad even himself with bizarre and terrible remarks. Oh, and he also directly threatened press freedom. So, Donald Trump is actually outdoing himself, which is quite a feat. So, let's talk about budgeting. The 1.7 trillion military budget they're asking, the Trump administration is asking for 1.7 trillion, includes a massive slush fund for Trump's political allies. That's not that surprising, actually. It's a very corrupt administration, probably the most nakedly corrupt in history. So let's see here. What do we have? Last week, President Donald Trump declared that the federal government cannot afford to spend any money for daycare because we're fighting wars. I thought we weren't supposed to be fighting wars. According to Trump, the well being of America's children is not a concern of the administration. We have to take care of one thing: military protection. Trump declared, we have to guard the country. Let me put it to you this way. That daycare is pretty important because the children who might wind up in the military, well, they need to be able to read, and you don't want you want to take care of the kids who could wind up being your cannon fodder. Even if you're Donald Trump, you gotta protect them while they're young, and you gotta grow them up for the draft, which apparently is going to become necessary if we're fighting all these wars. So it says here these comments were made at a luncheon that Trump thought was private, but was inadvertently live streamed on YouTube. Oh fuck, we might have to have a look at that. Let's see. I didn't realize this. Let's see. I don't see the link. Damn it. Oh, well. So the request does not account for the war in Iran. Oh, wow. Which, according to a detailed calculation by Steven Simler, is costing $2.1 billion per day. Wow. The Trump administration says it will request another $200 billion in supplemental defense funding. I'd rather spend the money on social programs, to be honest. Notably, the Department of War cannot account for the money it is currently allocated. No kidding. So this is the Pentagon's golden egg. While there is no money for childcare, Trump's defense budget allocates at least $17.5 billion to the Golden Dome, a space-based missile defense system. This is in addition to $25 billion that was earmarked for the project last year. Wow. Interesting. Elon Musk spent over $250 million supporting Trump in the 2024 election. He's going to get $2 billion to develop satellites that can track missiles and aircraft. So says here, SpaceX is slated to go public later this year, and much of its valuation is tied to its $22 billion in federal government contracts. Of course, Palantir has some of that pie. Wow. Says here $350 billion with little oversight. Wow. $350 billion through the budget reconciliation process. Wow. For a president who swears we aren't going to have new wars, this is a mighty neocon sounding budget. No, Deacon Dave, I don't vote pro-abortion. I vote anti-MAGA or anti-Trump. They may wind up being pro-abortion, but I'm voting to anti-MAGA. And I think your buddy Trump is pretty much going to take care of MAGA's future. That's going down the drain with every bomb that gets dropped on Iran. What's up, 12th man? All right, so let's move on here. So I talked last week, I think it was, maybe it was Saturday, about what's his name? Qasem Soleimani, had two relatives in Los Angeles that had their green cards revoked. So I think they've been picked up by ICE. So this is a follow-up story. It says here, Iranian generals' relatives lived lavish LA lifestyle while promoting Iranian regime propaganda. So let's listen to this story.
Iranian generals' relatives lived lavish LA lifestyle while promoting Iranian regime propaganda, by Fedor Zarkin. This article is read by an automated voice. Two Los Angeles-based relatives of a deceased Iranian leader were arrested by immigration agents after one of them extolled Iranian leadership and denigrated the United States, and both repeatedly posted images and videos depicting a decidedly Western lifestyle, according to federal authorities, and screenshots of the two women's social media accounts. Amida Soleimani Afshar and her daughter Saringnaseret Hosseini were arrested by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents Friday and had their green cards revoked, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in a statement over the weekend, citing in particular Afshar's outspoken support of the totalitarian, terrorist regime in Iran. Soleimani Afshar and her daughter are the niece and grandniece, respectively, of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Major General Qasem Soleimani, who was killed in a drone strike launched in the last days of President Trump's first term, Rubio said. The general's daughter has disputed the family connection, according to Iranian media, which has quoted a statement attributed to her saying that the two women bear no relation to the general and that the State Department's claims are a lie. Soleimani Afshar's posts on Instagram and Twitter, captured and republished by numerous news outlets, point to at least the appearance of a life of luxury. Soleimani Afshar regularly published images and videos of herself in what appear to be designer clothes, engaging in activities associated with wealth, including riding in a Hummer and posing for glamour shots in short dresses. Her daughter posted photos in a similar, though at times more sexually provocative, vein. None of the social media accounts appeared to be active, or their old posts accepted.
Wait, so they lost their green card for posing in racy outfits? What kind of bullshit is this? Wasn't there a like a reality show called Shahs of Sunset or something? There's a whole cohort of Iranians who do this sort of stuff.
Accessible, as of Monday afternoon. The irony was not lost on some social media denizens who blasted Soleimani Afshar's purported support for a regime that restricts women from showing so much as hair in public, while she showed that and more on social media. She hates America, one user commented on an Instagram post about Soleimani Afshar and Hosseini's arrests. I can't wait to see what she wears back home. A Los Angeles man who said he met Soleimani Afshar through a mutual acquaintance lauded her arrest, saying he had long believed that Soleimani Afshar and her daughter do not deserve to live in the U.S. because of Soleimani Afshar's pro-Iranian statements on social media. They don't like it in America. They shouldn't be here, Maziar Aflaki told The Times in an interview, making clear he is a critic of the current Iranian regime. Aflaki said Soleimani Afshar had called him about a week ago asking for advice because the FBI had contacted her with questions about where she lived. He also said Soleimani Afshar had previously shown him photos of her next to high-ranking people in the Iranian military, stating that one of them was her uncle. Rubio said in the statement that while in the U.S., Soleimani Afshar promoted Iranian regime propaganda, celebrated attacks against American soldiers and military facilities in the Middle East, praised the new Iranian supreme leader, denounced America as the Great Satan, and voiced her unflinching support for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a designated terror organization. She did all this, he continued, while enjoying a lavish lifestyle in Los Angeles, as attested to by her frequent posting on her recently deleted Instagram account. Rubio added, "The Trump administration will not allow our country to become a home for foreign nationals who support anti-American terrorist regimes." Soleimani Afshar came to the U.S. in 2015 on a tourist visa, and was granted asylum in 2019, and got her green card in 2021, U.S. Department of Homeland Security Acting Assistant Secretary Lauren Biss previously said. Since then, she traveled to Iran 4 times, disclosing the information in her application last year to become a citizen, Biss said. Hosseini came to the U.S. on a student visa and was also granted asylum in 2019, then got her green card in 2023, BIS said. Soleimani Afshar's trips to Iran demonstrated her claims to need asylum in Iran were fraudulent, the Department of Homeland Security wrote in a statement on X. Soleimani Afshar and Hosseini are being held in an ICE facility in Pearsall, Texas, according to a searchable database of detainees. Thanks for listening to this story, brought to you by the Los Angeles Times.
All right. Let's see. Defend her citizenship. She's not a citizen, Deacon Dave. She was a green card holder. So I am a free speech absolutist. And believe it or not, green card holders have free speech rights. That's how the Constitution works. So shifting gears, but we'll go back to war, at least. Ex-CIA Director David Petraeus says U.S. needs to learn whole new concept of warfare from Ukraine. So let's hear this.
At the same time, the war with Ukraine has been raging on, and Ukraine has been heavily relying on drone technology in the fighting against Russia. In a 60 Minutes report that aired Sunday, 10 retired U.S. generals said they agree that Russia isn't winning the war despite its territorial gains. But some cautioned that it isn't winning either. But with the help of drones, it's managed to draw Russia into a stalemate. Now, CBS News just spoke with former CIA director and retired U.S. Army General David Petraeus. During his visit to Ukraine, the general spoke at the Kyiv Security Forum, where he said that the Ukrainian military has done more than just defend its country. It has redefined modern warfare. CBS News international reporter Aidan Stretch sat down with General Petraeus in Kyiv.
This week, the former director of the CIA, General David Petraeus, has been traveling across Ukraine. And today, he spoke at a forum here in Kyiv. And his speech actually took place deep underground in a parking lot because of the drones and missiles that continue to target the city. I sat down with General Petraeus shortly after his remarks to hear his perspective on where the war in Ukraine stands today. Based on what you saw this week in March 2026, does Russia or Ukraine have the upper hand?
Well, I think what's remarkable is that Russia no longer has the upper hand. Russia heavily outnumbers Ukraine. It outguns Ukraine. It has an economy 10 or 12 times the size of Ukraine's. And yet the Ukrainian forces right now are stopping the Russians cold on the front lines. Yes, there's still glide bombs, there's still drones every night. And in fact, there were 400 drones just today with dozens of missiles. But on the front lines, which is all important, the Russians have actually achieved less than the Ukrainians have in the last 2 weeks. Over the last 2 months, the Ukrainians have actually made greater incremental gains than have the Russians. And that's really quite remarkable. And it's a tribute to just not the sheer tenacity and determination and expertise of the soldiers on the front lines, although it is very much that. It's really a tribute to the extraordinary innovation that has characterized what's going on in Ukraine over the last 2 or 3 years in particular, when they've realized that they cannot, again, outnumber or outgun the Russians. So what they've done is outsmart them.
During our conversation, General Petraeus shared a number of specific examples of Ukrainian innovations that he has personally witnessed. He told me that Ukraine's cruise missile now flies further and carries a heavier payload than America's cruise missile. And he stressed the importance of the United States continuing to learn from and support its Ukrainian partners as they continue to innovate throughout this war.
A U.S. service member is working to stop his wife's deportation after she was detained inside a Louisiana military base just days after their wedding.
Yeah, these, it's really weird that, and I didn't intend on even talking about this story, but I know about it. And it's really weird that they go inside a military base and arrest the newlywed wife of a soldier. Now, she did overstay a visa or something like that. But you would think that exceptions could be made, even if she did something, she shouldn't have done. She has just, married a service member, you can't make an exception or make it legal or anything like that. And by the way, this woman is hot as she is hot. This service member is lucky. So since we started it, we'll just go ahead and listen to it. It's a short story.
Let's bring in CBS News correspondent Chanel Call. Hey, Chanel, what can you tell us about the story? It's really sad, actually.
Well, they're saying this was supposed to be the happiest week of their life, and obviously things took a turn for the worst. Staff Sergeant Matthew Blank and 22-year-old Annie Ramos just got married in March. Then on Thursday, Mugo, just a couple days ago, he brought her to his base in Fort Polk, Louisiana, so she could get her paperwork set up, she could get military benefits, and she could get on track to get her green card. Of course, that didn't happen. She was detained by federal law enforcement there that day. Now, just to give you a bit of background here, this is somebody who was born in Honduras. She came to the U.S. back in 2005. She was really young. She was under 2 years old. Then in 2020, Mugo, she applied for DACA, and she was sort of in limbo with that process. Her mother telling the Associated Press that Ramos is somebody who was a Sunday school teacher and a biochemistry major. Now, what is DHS saying about that? They're saying that back in 2005, again, when she was a toddler and just came to the country, her family failed to appear for an immigration hearing. And they're saying that's why this final removal order was issued, and she was ultimately detained at that base in Louisiana. Ramos is still being held at that detention facility in Louisiana right now. And her husband, Sergeant Blank, is saying he's going to do everything he can to continue to fight for her release.
Wow, we'll see what comes next with that one. Chanel Call, thank you so much for your reporting. Vice President J.D. Vance had a warning for Iran during...
We'll go ahead and pause it here. But yeah, Dave, seeing that woman, damn. The problem is I've kind of aged out of hot young Latina range. So, I might not be so lucky. But I'll take an older Brazilian hottie if she can cook. All right, so this is Ken Klippenstein's Substack newsletter, and he's talking about Trump's biggest Iran fear. Trump is desperate for one thing, and I'm guessing that one thing will be popularity. He is not. This war is not popular.
Trump's biggest Iran fear. As tonight's deadline nears, Trump is desperate for one thing. By Ken Klippenstein. A whole civilization will die tonight, Donald Trump announced today, threatening to rain down hell on Iran. Don't let the bravado fool you. He's scared. On Monday, the president made a rare show of submission, bowing not to Washington or Wall Street, but to the people. Unfortunately, the American people would like to see us come home, Trump said of the Iran war on Monday, visibly irritated. If I had my choice, I'd keep the oil, but I also want to make the people of our country happy. The Iran war is deeply unpopular with Americans, basically every poll finding a majority opposed since the war began on February 28th. An extraordinary fact that media have largely glossed over. It is virtually unprecedented not to see a spike in popular support when Washington launches a military operation, so much so that political science has a term for it, the rally around the flag effect. In the case of the Iran war, it's not that the spike in support was small or short-lived. It never happened at all. I do not pretend to know what the president will decide at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, his deadline for Iran. I doubt even he knows. But the unprecedented public skepticism is clearly on the top of his mind. And it's very likely on the Pentagon's mind, too. When the commander-in-chief demands a plan, as Trump has, the military obliges, but in fraught situations like these, it exercises some discretion in how those plans are briefed, filling it with low percentages and high risks to send a message to the bomber-in-chief that it isn't the preferred option. And the polling could not be more clear that this isn't the preferred option. Even in the most controversial wars like Iraq, when the war initiates, people tend to rally around the flag. This is remarkable that at the very beginning of the war, there's overwhelming opposition not only from liberals and the left, but from much of Trump's base as well. Politics professor Stephen Zunes of the University of San Francisco says. CNN's data guru Harry Enton made this point in greater detail in a segment this week, crunching decades of data about rally around the flag effects across every major U.S. military engagement in the Middle East. The numbers are stark. During the beginning of the Iranian hostage crisis, Jimmy Carter's net approval jumped 32 points. George H.W. Bush saw a 31-point surge in the first month of the first Gulf War. George W. Bush got 14 points out of the 2003 Iraq invasion. Trump, 1 month into the Iran war, he is down 4 points, making him the only president in the modern era to lose ground after launching a war. Enton compared it to the one recent precedent he could find, Biden's botched Afghanistan withdrawal, which cost him 6 points and, as Enton put it, effectively ended his presidency politically. Biden never recovered. Whether the Iran war is the death of Trump and Trumpism remains to be seen, but the picture looks grim. The war started 12 points underwater in public polling and has since dropped another 10, and only 29% of Americans say it's worth the cost, compared to 59% who said the same about the 2003 Iraq war at a comparable point. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth is 30 points net unfavorable versus Donald Rumsfeld's plus 48 at the equivalent moment in Iraq, a nearly 80-point gap. Dick Cheney was plus 62 during the Gulf War, a gap of over 90 points. Trump's approval on the economy has hit 27 points underwater. On foreign policy, 25 points underwater. The dumb guy explanation for all of this is, incidentally, the explanation you'll find in basically all the major media coverage, is that Americans are just feeling the pinch of gas prices. But that doesn't explain the immediate opposition to the war from day one, before any of the economic effects started to kick in. And I don't think Larry in Wisconsin is worrying about oil futures and the Strait of Hormuz. What makes Americans' quiet skepticism all the more incredible is that it exists despite a tsunami of propaganda they've been bombarded with about the war. This week has been dominated by glowing media accounts of the made-for-Hollywood heroics involved in the rescue of the American pilot downed in Iran, the CIA's role, their escape training, the evasion of IRGC military dogs and hunters, and on and on. Trump has pushed this personally, trying to desperately associate himself with something, anything popular. Before the shoot-down and the rescue, the American public was saturated with media coverage that mostly highlighted the excellence of our weapons systems, the exquisite intelligence, and how perfectly it's all being carried out. The surgical strikes, the careful target selection, the assurances that civilian casualties are being minimized, the retired generals nodding along on cable news about the operational brilliance on display. This is a war of the future, relying overwhelmingly on the acceleration of decision-making fueled by AI, with again the message that air power provides minimal U.S. casualties. Check the news coverage on any day, though. There is hardly a word about what is actually being bombed and why. It's all 90% destroyed here, ahead of schedule there, practically ignoring the fact that civilization is being strangled in the routine. This is exactly the kind of ostensibly low-stakes war that the national security system has been perfecting for decades now, not so much because it is manipulating the public on purpose, but because it wants to reduce the friction of public and presidential opinion and interference, thereby...
Yeah, I'll go ahead and stop that there. Everybody gets the gist. Trump is just not our warrior king. And, when you're going in talking about ending civilizations, and I'm going to tell you, the Persian culture, the Persian civilization, even I am like, I've actually always wanted to go to Tehran. Bottom line is we don't want leadership that's threatening to go in and end civilizations. That's not how Americans think. We are, I think sometimes I roll my eyes when I hear, oh, we're a nation of immigrants. But I have known, in my 61 years, I've known all kinds of people, and you just don't. It's America's one of the few places where it's possible, if you live in a big metro area, for instance, to know all kinds of different types of people. If you've ever been in the military, you're going to know all kinds of people. America doesn't work that way. And, even with its white supremacy roots, over the past, 250 years, we have grown out of that. It's still there at root. A lot of it is just buried in the culture with assumptions and attitudes and worldviews. But in the end, we have grown to a point to where you just don't go out and, we don't get rah rah when the president goes, "We're ending a civilization." That sounds like some Bond villain shit. We got a goddamn Bond villain for a president, apparently. So I hope America doesn't ever make this kind of mistake again. Hopefully we learn from this very obvious mistake. So I got a couple stories that are non-Iran war related. So Trump administration to end civil rights settlements for transgender students. Apparently there were some court cases out there. Administration officials stated the move is intended to align federal oversight with a restored interpretation of Title IX, arguing that the prior agreements exceeded the department's statutory authority by expanding the definition of sex to include gender identity without explicit congressional approval. They might have a point here. So that'll wind up in court, I'm sure. And lastly, before we get into some videos, Delta raises check bag fees $10 amid jet fuel price surge. So this war is now affecting your check baggage, folks. Delta's joining other carriers, I think JetBlue and United. Delta said it would increase the fee to check a bag by $10 for tickets purchased starting on Wednesday. The changes come as the industry is facing a surge in fuel costs. So thanks, Trump. Trump and the MAGABlacks hitting your spring break travel expenses. All right. So everybody, please make sure you have hit the like button. If you happen to be new, please subscribe to Stanley versus the World. Check us out. You may not like it, but who knows, you might. So that's the highest recommendation I can give today. Also support the show by supporting the host. Tomorrow will be the this week's IPO for the Sovereign Beer Fund, working towards the weekend. So support the host. The Cash App is scrolling at the bottom. Let's see, what else do we have here? We are going to have a look at the Tucker Carlson making comments about Trump's Easter Sunday performance. Even Tucker Carlson, who, if I recall, was very pro-Trump. He called Trump daddy and said daddy was home over the summer of 2024. And sounds like little Tucker is now a teenager and rebelling a little bit against daddy.
Millions of American Christians voted for Donald Trump when he ran for president in the last election, and millions more Christians around the world rooted for him to win. Many still do root for Donald Trump. Now, why is that? Because of his personal piety? Well, of course not. Trump, to his credit, has never claimed to be personally pious, especially religious in any sense. They voted for him and they still support him because he seemed like a protector. He seemed like someone who might save them from the growing and highly aggressive agnosticism, if not atheism, of, say, the technology class or the bureaucratic class, godless nations of other religions that oppose us. Donald Trump seemed like someone who would protect Christians from that, who was committed to the free exercise of religion in this country, and who was also committed to ending abortion. Whether or not he himself opposed abortion, whether he was pro-life in any meaningful sense, didn't seem to matter. He would appoint justices that opposed abortion, that thought Roe v. Wade was unconstitutional. He did that. And that he would basically carry the flag for their issues, and that he was sympathetic to them. And they support him on that basis. Can they still support him? That's the question. And that's a question Christians should have begun to ask themselves on January 4th of this year. And that was the day that the president announced the arrest of the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, who was, no question, an anti-American leader and a socialist, not someone most Americans liked or really had cause to like. So the problem was not necessarily that Trump was against an anti-American leader. In fact, that was a benefit in the eyes of most of his voters. The problem was why we did it and why the president told us he did it. And that was for the oil. So in the days before that operation in early January, the president tweeted out, sent out on his Truth Social account, and also said in public, we're doing this because we want the oil, because that oil belongs to the United States. He never explained how exactly the United States would own the natural resources of a foreign country. Apparently, American oil companies helped develop the oil fields in Venezuela. Therefore, we own the oil. That was the idea, and they stole it from us. But there was no real effort to explain how that works, how that makes any sense at all. Instead, you had the president of the United States say, we need the oil. Oil's really important. True and true. Therefore, we're going to take it. And therefore, apparently, we did. In the days after that operation, the successful removal of the president of the country and the installation of his vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, as president, our president, Donald Trump, held a widely publicized on-camera meeting with the heads of American oil companies and talked through how we're going to split up the natural resources of Venezuela and why this is great for America. So why should Christians have paused at exactly that moment and asked, can I still support this? Is this what I voted for? Is this what I want? Is this acceptable? And the reason is really simple, because Trump at that moment revealed that the motive was taking something that we wanted. And that's not acceptable for Christians. In fact, that's not acceptable for Americans or any civilized people, because taking other.
So when does someone get to tell Tucker Carlson, I told you so? Okay, the dude has no scruples. And, frankly, the billionaire class, this is what you get when you have a businessman / CEO of the country. These guys will take what they think is theirs. What the fuck do you think Manifest Destiny was? Manifest Destiny essentially said that, hey, if you're not using your land or your resources in a way that aligns with the European values, where you take land and you become a good steward of it and you make money off the resources and stuff like that, well, we're going to take it because God wants us to take it. What Trump did was essentially a version of Manifest Destiny, and that ties back into the white supremacy, the systemic racism argument. What was happening in Venezuela as far as the oil fields just kind of not being used productively, it aligns with that whole European value system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for people, and I'm kind of going a little bit off track here, for people like a Thomas Sowell or a Glenn Lowry or the MAGABlacks, you know, that whole Black conservative ethos. Yeah, this is your white supremacy, folks. It's nebulous. It's kind of out there. Might be a little theoretical. It might be a little critical theory. However, it is tangible, and it just requires a little bit of knowledge of history and a smidge of critical thinking. What Donald Trump is doing is absolutely in line with a lot of Christian values, to be honest.
People's stuff by force cannot be allowed. In fact, preventing that is the basis of our legal code. If there's one thing that every person knows, that is, in a civilized country, you can't steal without penalty. It's not allowed. That doesn't belong to you. You can't shoplift. You can't rob banks. You can't embezzle. You can't invade countries to steal their stuff, because they're all varieties of the same theme, which is theft. And theft is wrong. It's wrong under the American legal code, but it's also wrong under the Christian legal code. Theft is wrong. Spelled out really clearly. It's also intuitive. And here was the president saying, we're just stealing this because we can. Well, as a practical matter, that's quite a thing to say out loud, given that we know from history that the things you do will be done unto you. Once you set a standard, you will have to live by that standard. Write a law, you'll be judged by that law. So if the new law is, I can take it because I want it, and I have more power than you, at some point, we can rest assured the tables will be turned, and the things that we want and cherish and have earned and that we own will be taken from us by force at the moment when some other power has more force than we do. It's really simple, sometimes called the law of the jungle. And it may be the law of nature, but people don't want to live under that law because it is a brutal and unforgiving law.
Well, I don't know if Tucker, because I don't really follow Tucker, believe it or not. He has a YouTube channel. I guess I'll subscribe to it. But we knew, I wonder if he commented on Stephen Miller's comment about, you know, power, basically might makes right. And the new rules, the new American foreign policy is, if we want it, we're going to take it because we've got the best military, et cetera, et cetera. I'd be interested to know, did Tucker comment on that at all?
So they create higher laws, or they appeal to the highest law of all, which is God's law, which prohibits that. So this was a profound moment in American history, probably in the history of the modern world, where the most powerful nation said, if we want it, we'll take it. No one's ever said that before. Now, they've done it under the guise of ideology. They've made up stories to hide the fact they're doing it. But to say you're doing it implicates everybody else in the crime. You can't say you didn't know. Your president just told you on television, we took out their president because we want his oil. And at that point, you're an accessory to the crime, whether you want to be or not. And it's at that point that a lot of people should have spoken up and said, I'm out. Not that I hate Trump or don't like his entire program. Lots of things about it I love. I'm grateful. I'd maybe vote for him again, but I can't support theft because it's immoral. But they didn't. Maybe some did, but certainly the leaders of the American Christian churches.
Listen to this hypocritical fuck. Dude, if you elect an immoral man, he's going to do immoral stuff. The fuck?
By and large said absolutely nothing. And maybe because they said nothing, this accelerated. These are the same people who sort of didn't notice somehow that on Inauguration Day, the president did not take his oath of office with his hand on the Bible. His wife stood next to him holding it. I was about 15 feet away and saw it, but he did not put his hand on the Bible. And that should have been maybe a clue that we need to pause and think about, what is this? Why wouldn't you put your hand on the Bible?
Okay, well, why are you waiting until now? And again, I don't watch. This is probably the first time I've actually even, brought up a Tucker Carlson YouTube video. I've never even seen the clips. So why is he waiting till a year and some months into the Trump presidency to bring this up?
If you don't believe in the Bible, you think it's just a book, there's no cost to you to putting your hand on it, just kind of following the protocol, going along with the tradition. All presidents do it. Why aren't you doing it? And you're not doing it intentionally. You're choosing not to put your hand on the Bible when you take that oath. That suggests not that you don't believe it's real, because if you didn't believe it was real, why would you care? You'd put on the costume and take it off. It doesn't matter. That suggests you know it is real and you're rejecting it intentionally. You know what you're doing and you're doing it anyway. But nobody asked questions about that either. It seemed kind of inappropriate, given the celebration then in progress, to ask, why wouldn't you put your hand on the Bible when you take the oath of office to lead our nation? But pretty much nobody did. I didn't. I'll admit that. I saw it and didn't say one word. Bothered me ever since. But right around January 4th, it became clear that maybe he didn't put his hand on the Bible because he affirmatively rejects what's inside that book. And what's inside that book are limits on human behavior. Because if there's one theme that spans all 66 books in the Christian Bible, it's that you are not God. And you cannot assume his powers. Because you don't have them. You may convince yourself you have them. You may want them. You may have been promised them. But in the end, they're not yours. And you'll never have them. And you can only destroy yourself and the people around you by pretending that you do. That is the consistent message that spans from Genesis to Revelation. And people who ignore that law are punished. Just like people who ignore gravity or freezing temperatures are punished. Because these are laws that were not created by people. They supersede people. But on January 4th, when the President of the United States told us he was stealing, that our country was stealing something that didn't belong to us, people should have piped up and said something, but they didn't. And that got us all the way to yesterday, which was Easter Sunday. Easter Sunday is not just a holy day on the Christian calendar, it is the center of the Christian calendar. It is the holiest day in Christian life. Because it's the day that Christians remember the whole point of their religion, which is not that Jesus was killed, but that he rose from the dead, that he beat death, unique in history. And this is the day that Christians celebrate his resurrection. And in this country, that celebration's been watered down effectively to candy and Easter bunnies, but globally and certainly historically, Easter is the focus. It's preceded by Holy Week and Lent, 40 days of self-denial and prayer, all leading up to yesterday, Easter morning. And for faithful Christians, it is still the biggest day of the year. And it's a day of joy. The thing every person fears most is death. We're born fearing it because we're born knowing it's coming. And Christianity, unique among religions, promises victory over it. And Jesus' resurrection is proof that God can beat death because only God creates life. And so the morning of Easter is a uniquely joyful and peaceful moment. And yet that peace yesterday was shattered. That's not an overstatement. It was shattered for many observant Christians by a statement that the President of the United States put out at 8:03 a.m. Eastern time on Easter morning that said this, and we're going to read it in its entirety, not in outrage or self-righteousness, but honestly in horror. Quote, Tuesday will be power plant day and bridge day, all wrapped up in one in Iran. There will be nothing like it. 3 exclamation points. Open the fucking straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. All caps. Praise be to Allah. President Donald J. Trump. Now, a lot of people reading that imagined, of course, this can't.
Sounds like he's one of the godless horde to me.
And be real. Did the President of the United States really just write that? And it is real. It is maybe the most real thing this president has ever done. And also the most revealing. On every level. It is vile on every level. It begins with a promise to use the U.S. military, our military, to destroy civilian infrastructure in another country, which is to say to commit a war crime, a moral crime against the people of the country, whose welfare, by the way, was one of the reasons we supposedly went into this war in the first place. They're being killed by their government. We have to rescue them. And now here's our president, not even a month and a half into the conflict, which we are not winning, by the way, because the Straits of Hormuz are not open. There's one way to keep track. That's the measurement. Saying that we're going to use our military to kill the civilians of this country who didn't choose the war. They got nothing to do with it. They're like civilians everywhere. Blow up their bridges? Bridges on military bases? No, just bridges. Bridges that people cross every day to go to school and work and to worship, and yes, church, because there are over 1 million Christians in Iran. This is their Easter too. And power plants. Not the power plants attached to missile factories, okay, but civilian power plants in a country of almost 100 million people. What happens when a modern country, and a country that has a nuclear program is a modern country, sorry, Iran is a modern country, what happens when it loses power? Well, people die. Babies connected to incubators die. People in hospitals die. And those are the first level effects. And then people begin to starve. And then you have refugee crises. People leave the cities looking for food. And yes, they move into other countries. In the region, in Europe, in the United States, you cause chaos and death, mass suffering and death when you do that. And we have done that. We have intentionally bombed civilian infrastructure in Iran. It's totally unacceptable. Not under the phony laws of some international body, but under moral law, God's law, killing non-combatants, people who did nothing wrong, who didn't choose this war, who were just people created by God. That is immoral. That will never be moral. That can never be justified. That is always wrong. It can be expedient. We need to do this. It doesn't mean it's right. It's the most wrong thing. And we should always remember that what we do will be done to us. Live by the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Live by the killing of children, the bombing of elementary schools and colleges. And you will die, and your children will die by those same things. That's just a fact. That's never not been true. We don't want it to be true. It's the last thing we want to be true. But it is nonetheless true. And everyone knows that on an animal level. You can feel that that's true. Ooh. Shouldn't.
I'm going to go ahead and drop the link just to see if a 12th man or anybody's got comment on this Trump voter. He seems to be making sense for once. Where's my MAGABlacks? Where's my 12th man? Where's the pro-MAGA folks? Where are y'all? Oh, this is hilarious.
Do that, you'll be punished for it in this life or the next, or maybe both. For the president to say that and not bother to tell us, oh, it was an accident we did this? Well, one, it makes you reassess the bombing of the girls' school attached to the IRGC naval base, where the children of Iranian military officers were incinerated in a bombing, not one but two, a double tap. Every person has assumed that was a mistake. No American could ever believe the U.S. government would do that on purpose. I still don't believe it. But after this, you have to kind of wonder, how did that happen? Was it bad targeting, coordinates given to us, we hope, by Israel, another country? Maybe it wasn't. Who knows at this point? For the president to call for that, it's worth stopping and saying, no, this is not acceptable under any circumstances. You haven't justified it. You couldn't justify it. And it can't be done in our name. And the point, of course, is to get the Iranians to open the Strait of Hormuz. Well, no sane person thinks that's going to work. At which point you have to ask, why would we do it anyway? Well, there are a bunch of possible reasons, but the darkest of all is for the sake of doing it. For the sake of killing, for the sake of exercising the most obvious form of power, which is extinguishing life. That's why we're doing it. The thrill is in the killing. The power is in the killing. The exertion of force is the point. You don't want to think that. But after a message like this, what could possibly be the reason? There's nobody who thinks that if we do this, and we pray we don't, for our sake as well as the sake of non-combatant, innocent Iranians, nobody thinks this is going to work. But then the tweet continues. Pardon me, the ironically named truth continues. There will be nothing like it. Open the effing strait. How dare you speak that way on Easter morning to the country? Who do you think you are? You're tweeting out the F word on Easter morning? You'll be living in hell. As if hell is a place. Hell is a condition. And this is an example of that condition. Just watch. Praise be to Allah. So obviously you're mocking the religion of Iran. Okay. If you seek a religious war, that's a good idea. But by the way, no decent person mocks other people's religions. You may have a problem with the theology. Presumably you do if it's not your religion, and you can explain what that is. But to mock other people's faith is to mock the idea of faith itself. And we should never mock that, because at its core is the acknowledgement that we are not in charge of the universe. We did not build it. We won't be here at the end of it. We can destroy life. We cannot create it because we are not God. The message of all faith at the biggest picture level is the message in our Bible, which is you are not God. And only if you think you are do you talk this way. But it's not just mockery of Islam. And no president should mock Islam. That's not your job. This is not a theocracy. We don't go to war with other theocracies to find out which theocracy is more effective. We are not a theocracy. And God willing, we never will be, because theocracies corrupt the religion. No, this is a mockery not just of Islam, it's a mockery of Christianity. To send out a tweet with the F word on Easter morning promising the murder of civilians and then saying praise be to Allah without explaining any of it, you are mocking me and every other Christian because we're Christians. Oh, I get it. We can't support that. Under no circumstances can we support that. Doesn't mean you have to hate Trump or take the opposite position on every issue from Trump. You shouldn't. A lot of his positions are the right positions, but you cannot support that. That is evil. That is an intentional desecration of beauty and truth, which is the definition of evil. And you have to ask, where does evil lead? If the core point of evil is to destroy, which it is, God creates, Satan destroys. It's dualism. When you see something of beauty being created, when you hear the truth being spoken, you are witnessing a manifestation of God's power. And when you see the opposite, you're witnessing the opposite. So where does this lead? Well, on a practical level and a spiritual level, they converge in the same place, which is the use of weapons of mass destruction. So on a practical level, on a strategic level, if you're at the Pentagon gaming this out, like, how does this work? The President of the United States keeps laying down markers. You can't go past next Tuesday at 2 p.m. or whatever. You must open the strait or else you'll be living in hell, as if we're not there already. And at a certain point, what we're doing is revealing that we've exhausted conventional power. If there's some tricky way to open the Strait of Hormuz by air, probably would have done it by now, because we are on a path to plunge the world into global depression and famine. And that's not hair on fire panicanism. That's math. 30% of the world's fertilizer, 20% of its energy? Yeah, that's a global depression and famine. What happens to Africa? 1.5 billion sub-Saharan Africans without enough Fertilizer? Well, a lot of them be living in the United States. That's just going to happen. It's right across the Atlantic Ocean. Check a map. So getting the strait open is the essence of the mission. It is the strategic goal. By the way, not to be bitter, it was open on February 27th and had been for, since there were pirates roaming the strait. For modern history, it had been open. Now it's closed because of this war. Okay, so there's that. But leave that aside. Okay, that was then. How do we get it open?
CKJ3, not that I know of. I haven't really been watching. I listened a little bit to T's show last night, and listened to a bit of Nightish's show, but I haven't really been listening to any MAGA blacks. But even if they don't talk on it, because who would be crazy enough to talk on this, at least positively? It doesn't matter. They've already voted, and it's my time now. People like 12th Man saying that 12th Man says he already told me he didn't agree with nothing Trump is doing in Iran. That doesn't mean I like Iran either. Well, that's not my point, 12th Man. I responded to the venerable 12th Man that he's part of the mandate. Okay, I don't know how many times I've heard Trump and his little minions talk about the American people and the mandate that they received by winning the 7 swing states. So you're part of the mandate as far as I'm concerned. They think you're supporting what they're doing. That's why they're fucking doing it.
Conventional airstrikes will not open the strait for very obvious reasons. You can close it with mines. So if you reach the end of your conventional power, where does that leave you? Oh, with non-conventional power. What's that a euphemism for? Nuclear weapons. And the effects of that hardly need to be explained. Well, they can't be fully known because modern nuclear weapons have never been used. But you can just draw obvious conclusions, like life in Iran, not possible. So you wipe out a country of 92 million people. What about directly across the Persian Gulf? What about the 7 other countries? All of them allies of the United States, the biggest oil producing countries in the world. Could you live there? What about the 100-odd million people who live in those countries? Maybe not possible for them either. Would a nuclear strike be followed by peace? Probably not. The U.S. isn't the only country in the world with nuclear weapons. You could have a global nuclear war. That's why we haven't used nuclear weapons in 80 years. No one has. Because you don't know where it goes from there. This is insane. Okay? This is insane. It's hard to believe you even need to say this out loud. Oh, but you do. Because all things being equal, that's where we're heading. And how do we know that? Well, there are a million signs, but the most obvious is the dumbest neocons in Trump's orbit are saying it out loud. Now, in some cases, you don't even want to mention their names because these are not decision makers. These people are very much like Jeffrey Epstein. They're not actually the evil mastermind. Jeffrey Epstein's kind of an idiot. He's an employee, obviously. He's a communications hub. He's to get the message out.
Oh, wait. Did he say Jeffrey Epstein? Okay, where is this going?
To your people. And it's the same with America's most prominent neocons. They're not making policy. They don't understand anything. They don't have...
I know I'm going to be up, CK. Zateo, which is Mehdi Hassan's outfit, his little independent media outfit, which is doing quite well, by the way. They're going live at 8 Eastern time. I don't think let's see, what time is it? Probably I will not be, but I'm not going to say I'm not. Depends on where we go with this. I don't know that I'm going to do much more than 4 hours. Speaking of which, I'm pretty sure I might have mentioned it yesterday. I'm going to start kind of keeping the weekday hours, right around that 4 hour. I can go up to 6, but 4 hours just seems to work. And then, on Saturdays, we just go, from until. Sundays will be optional, depending, on the Sunday or how tired I am. But, these shorter shows, I just feel crisper, it just feels more professional. I don't wander off as much. At least that's what I think personally. Let's see. Really? Okay. I know T graduated from high school.
Huge audiences. They have.
She said she talks about she spent some time in college.
No organic power. They're messengers and flack takers. They're the ones who get the abuse for the policies of others. Put some lunatic on TV. Rah! Everyone can hate him. But is he coming up with the plan? No, of course not. He's got a weekend show on Fox. But it's useful to watch what he says. In fact, the president of the United States himself has said this. Watch Mark Levin on Saturday night. You think Trump is dumb? You think he's doing this to juice Mark Levin's ratings? No. It's not possible to increase the ratings of someone nobody wants to watch. The point is to send a message. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's true. Levin's show, written probably not by Levin, which has almost no viewers, has been a place where the future is revealed in its broadest outline. It's a place to test ideas. It's a place to announce obliquely what's going to happen. And his most recent show should get you sitting bolt upright in your chair. And yes, this ran this weekend, Easter weekend, as if the defiling of beauty couldn't be more obvious. Easter week, could you pick another weekend to give the finger to Christianity other than Easter weekend? Apparently not. In fact, of course you couldn't. That's the point. Do it on Easter. Anyone who will accept this will accept any humiliation. In any case, here's what Mark Levin said on his Easter weekend show about what we ought to do next in Iran. Watch.
And the casualty numbers, as horrible as any casualty is, need some context. Let's look at World War II. The Battle of the Bulge, 80,000 to 90,000 plus casualties, deaths and injuries and so forth. Nearly 10% of all the casualties in World War II happened at the Battle of the Bulge near the end of the war. The Battle of Okinawa, 50,000 plus casualties, over 12,000, nearly 13,000 killed on that island, which is what convinced Truman that we would lose a million men if we didn't drop the atomic bombs that we did. So this is a war or a peace mission to stop nuclear weapons that can blow away millions of Americans. Every bit as important as World War II. This is a crucially important.
Mark Levin, the only person crazier than Mark Levin right now, by the way, is Donald Trump. So, I don't know. I'm going to watch a few more minutes of this, then I'm going to go ahead and move on. Again, this link is in the show notes if anybody wants to watch the whole show. The whole show's like 2.5, almost 2.5 hours. This is a very long monologue, but we'll watch a couple more minutes and we'll move on.
Military operation, war, call it what you want, peace mission. And we ought to be celebrating the success of our military, unifying around our military and our commander-in-chief, and urging them to complete the task so our country is safe from nuclear weapons by insane, suicidal primitives from the 7th century.
Did you catch that? Did you make it through the whole clip? It's not easy. It's not easy, but embedded in there, and that's why we prefer a transcript over the actual audio, Embedded in there is something you need to know. It's an argument that is being test-driven, and since no one, to our knowledge, has pushed back against it, may be in full operation now, it's an argument for nuclear weapons against Iran. And here's to restate, in case you couldn't make it through the accent, here's what he said. Nearly 10% of all casualties in the Second World War happened at the Battle of the Bulge, which, of course, at the end of the war. The Battle of Okinawa, 50,000 casualties, nearly 13,000 killed on that island, which is what convinced Truman, Harry Truman, the then president.
Okay, I will end it here. I see no relevance in, talking about this part of World War II. Iran didn't have a nuclear weapon and no delivery system. This is just literally hyperbole that Mark Levin is pushing. So currently there is a NASA Artemis II briefing. We'll watch a little bit of that. And then there's a kind of an interactive photo that that Artemis took of the backside of the moon we'll look at.
From NASA. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Glaze.
Thank you, Jared. I just have to say, wow, when I look at all of those images that were scrolling by. I hope all of you are as inspired as I am. I know as they continue to be downloaded, they're just absolutely stunning. And we really hope that they are inspiring truly everyone in the world. As the crew surpassed their record for the farthest distance, as Jared just mentioned, when they traveled on the far side of the moon, they offered some compelling words, and I love this. They said they challenged this generation and the next to make sure that this record is not long-lived, and I love that because we have big plans to go not just back to the moon on a regular basis, but beyond. And then, of course, while it's been really exciting here the last couple of days, as we've been watching all of the activity in Orion, we still have to ensure that Reed, Victor, Christina, and Jeremy return home safely on Friday evening. So we're pretty focused on that now, making sure that they get home safely. I will just say a couple of things about yesterday's operations. Really provided a great opportunity to test how our flight operations teams and our science teams are working together in real time with the crews at the moon. And in fact, from my perspective, one of my favorite things about watching all of the amazing data that was flowing down yesterday is thinking about how so much of NASA is working together in order to enable all of what you're seeing.
Please stop exercise within 2 minutes for the off-ramp maneuver.
All right, better stop exercising. But as I was saying, what's really great to see everybody working together. So I think about our exploration programs that are supporting our transportation systems like Orion, working with our flight operations and our flight directors, all of the ground teams that are supporting, including the science team supported by the Science Mission Directorate, thinking about our crew that are actually performing the work, and then the payloads that have been provided that they're using. So everything that you're looking at isn't just, it's not just the pretty pictures. It's a huge chunk of NASA working together to enable that. All of this information that we're gathering is really going to help refine how we plan our future missions to the lunar surface. I'll just say that our flight operations team continues to fly Orion and put it through its paces as the crew and the spacecraft make their way home. And the mission isn't over yet. We do continue to learn from how our spacecraft and our crew are operating together in space. We continue with several of the science activities that are focused on the crew health and life in space. So still a lot of things going on. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Rick so he can share some of the operational details.
Thank you, Lori. The administrator touched on a few of the operations that the crew's been up to recently, but I'll fill in a few of the other details of interest. Since we last met Sunday evening, the crew performed the first orbital trajectory correction maneuver, outbound trajectory correction maneuver number 3. It was 10.4 feet per second. The burn duration was 19 seconds, and we used our auxiliary thrusters on the service module. Obviously, yesterday was the big day with flyby, and I'll save all those details for Kelsey, but we had some really poignant remarks from the crew, and I can assure you there wasn't a dry eye in mission control when the naming of the 2 craters was announced by Jeremy. 2 craters, 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 As part of the lunar flyby, the crew made their pass closest to the moon, flying at 3,138 miles per hour relative to the surface of the moon. And now they're on their way making their march back home to Earth. We bid a temporary goodbye to the moon earlier today at 1:23 p.m. Eastern time. That's the milestone where we exited the lunar sphere of influence and we're back under the control of Earth's gravity. As for today's operations, we had a couple of public affairs events. The crew is going to have, each of them will have a conference with their family members. We'll have some routine medical checks. And then in the evening, we're going to perform the first return trajectory correction maneuver. It will be 1.3 feet per second. It'll last about 15 seconds, and we're going to use the service module reaction control system thrusters to do that burn. We expect that burn to occur about 9 p.m. Eastern time. Finally, I'll conclude my remarks with acknowledging that the USS John P. Murtha has left port and has started steaming out to the midway point for the recovery of Integrity and her crew later on Friday. That's all for today's operations update, so I'll hand it over to Kelsey.
Thanks. Spirits are very high. We did what we set out to do. The lunar science team and the crew prepared extensively, as we talked about a couple days ago, for flyby, and I hope you all saw that yesterday during execution. We confirmed, as Lori mentioned, that we can, achieve science through orbital observations and through integrating science into flight operations. And as Rick just said, we left temporarily, and we're looking forward to integrating all these lessons learned in future missions. I can't conclude opening remarks without diving into science detail, so forgive me just a couple deep dives. Impact flashes, over a 30-minute observation period, and this was largely during that time of the eclipse, crew observed several impact flashes. We did have citizen scientists here on Earth also looking for flashes, and I know that the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter team is hard at work trying to identify evidence of those impact flashes that the crew observed. I did have a chance to have the post-flyby crew conference with the crew this morning, and we asked a lot of follow-ups on those impact flashes. Impact flashes are caused by micrometeorite impacts hitting the moon, and they really help tell us about the dynamic lunar environment, which is of course also important when we think about future missions. I don't know if I expected to have the crew see any on this mission, so you probably saw the surprise and shock on my face. And though I was not in the science evaluation room, I heard that there were audible screams of delight. So very excited science community. You've heard me talk a lot about the importance that human explorers bring to scientific exploration, especially around observations of color. And so I'm sure all of you, like I was eagerly awaiting if they saw any other colors other than black, white, and shades of gray. You heard that they did indeed. Right away, they started describing the green around Aristarchus Plateau and different brown hues. And these colors really help tell us nuances about the chemistry of lunar material, especially the greens around Aristarchus. That was exciting. That's something that we can all see from here on Earth. And so I encourage you all to go out and look at the moon tonight and look for Aristarchus and imagine those green hues that the crew members saw. You heard a lot of discussion, especially from our pilot, Victor Glover, about the Terminator, which really, to our mind, highlighted the benefits and also the challenges for future surface operations. The lighting conditions along the Terminator that the crew experienced yesterday do mimic, in many ways, the lighting conditions of the South Polar region. The low sun angles, the dramatic lighting causing, the extreme shadowing, and illumination also accentuating topography. This is really important for our agency's future moon-based plans and understanding how crew member observations can contribute to future mission planning. And finally, the Artemis II crew, in a very poignant moment, offered proposed names for two unnamed craters in the moon's eastern hemisphere: Crater Integrity for their vehicle and Crater Carol for Commander Wiseman's late wife. I think we have a picture. Yeah, thank you. Upon return, the crew does plan to submit these to the International Astronomical Union as consideration for official names. There was, as Rick said, not a dry eye in the house. Really poignant moment, and that we were really glad to observe them describing. And with that, I think we can take questions.
Yep, we will open the floor and take questions, and my colleague Will over here will pass along the mic. We can start with you, Jackie.
Yep, not interested in the questions. So we'll have a look at, this is from the New York Times. It's called Eyes on the Far Side of the Moon. Apparently, new shades of brown and green in the rings of impact craters, rugged terrain and long shadows along their rims, Earth rising over the moon's horizon in the glow of lofted dust. These are observations the Artemis 2 astronauts made during their lunar flyby on April 6th while passing by the passing by the far side of the moon. They saw parts never observed with human eyes before. So this is basically where the there's a picture, a big interactive sort of picture coming up. And you know what? Let me put this in the show notes. This was a late edition. Let's see here. All right, so if anybody wants to see that. So it's kind of it's not anything earth-shattering, but this is kind of like a big section where they've named some craters, and there's like a little depressed area they're calling a sea. So and then they zoom in a little bit. Like I said, it's probably more interested if you're into these sort of astronomical pictures. This is a close-up view of the Vavilov crater on the rim of the larger and older Hertzsprung crater. So again, you know, nothing earth-shattering, but if you're into looking at these sorts of pictures, excuse me. Let's see here. Some 24 minutes into the flyby, the Artemis 2 crew began observing the South Pole Aitken Basin, seen in the photo below, with the terminator line separating the sunlit side from the dark side, with an immense width of about, damn, a crater that's 1,600 miles wide. Holy cow. It is the largest known impact crater in the solar system. These observations will help scientists find clues to the moon's geological history. Damn, a 1,600 mile crater. Holy cow. So they're looking at solar corona with the moon here, and you can see Venus off in the distance. So, and this is a picture of the Earth seen from the Earthrise seen from the Orion spacecraft. Wow, that's pretty dramatic. That almost looks like something from a Star Wars movie. So, pretty interesting stuff. And let's see here. This next video is our buddy Ross Douthat talking to I assume it's our buddy Jonah Goldberg. And the topic is Trump's Iran fiasco. Yes, we're going to stay with the fiasco theme. So let's. This is about an hour. We'll see where we are after this is done. But these are conservatives, folks, talking about this quote fiasco of Trump's making.
Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant Podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. If I am talking too quickly, it's only because I want to get to our guest today. Longtime friend, former colleague, a frequent guest on here, and fan favorite in a sort of, it's really fun to play with a toothache, indulge your Eeyore kind of sensibility kind of thing. And I don't mean Nick Katogia, who we still have not managed to get on here. I mean, of course, Ross Douthat of the New York Times. And of course, in the old days, when Ross's star, now he's hit cruising speed or cruising altitude. And he's now a fixture of the elite firmament.
I've flatlined is what you're saying.
That's right. You're not descending. It's just that you don't have further to go.
There's no more lift. That's right.
That's right. And, but when you were rising fast and it was such a big deal that you got your New York Times column, for years, I always insisted on calling you purely National Review film reviewer, who also has a column in the New York Times, Ross Douthat. So I do want to talk to you, and people have asked me to have you on to talk about our slight disagreement about the future of conservatism and whatnot. But before we get there, just kind of curious, how's your war going?
Every day that the United States is in a bad situation and the global economy is facing gas shortages, fertilizer shortages, everything else, and the Iranian government is holding a critical choke point of global commerce hostage, that's a day that the advent of Skynet is delayed, Jonah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so, that's when I sit here watching events in the Middle East, I went straight from sort of taking a deep bath in AI stuff. That was sort of the focus of most of what I was reading, at least some of what I was talking to people about, to the Iran war. And I've tried to read the Iran war in light of, anxieties about something going badly wrong with AI, and find some kind of weird comfort in a modest slowdown. But all of that's sort of...
those stories are also converging.
Yeah, that's not... I don't know if I'm joking or not. I'm just, putting that in the thought space. I would say, we're talking... I don't know when this episode will air. Will it air after the president has addressed the nation?
Yeah, we should say we're recording this on Wednesday, April 1st. This is not an April Fool's Day joke. And this will air right after the weekend, I believe. So...
Okay, so who knows where we will be in terms of strikes, withdrawals, boots on the ground, anything else. I would say that, I have a pretty negative view of how the war is going. I think that the U.S. military has obviously performed admirably and visited all kinds of severe destruction on the Iranians and taken relatively few losses in return. But I think fundamentally separate, there's many levels at which you can analyze this, but I think fundamentally the key thing about this conflict was that it began not as a war against Iran's military infrastructure, but as a decapitation attempt against their regime. And you can sort of draw these fine distinctions and say, oh, well, we were doing the military, we were degrading the military infrastructure and the Israelis were doing the decapitation, and these are different strategies or something. Whatever. It's one war. We went into it with the Israelis. We made a decision not just to attack Iran's military, but to attack their political leadership. We're still going after their political leadership. And the reason to do that is to force an actual change of regime at the top. Maybe not a revolution, maybe not, the Shah back or liberal democracy breaking out, but at least, at a minimum, something like the Venezuelan scenario where there's new leadership that appears eager or willing to make a deal with the U.S. That has not worked. So far, doesn't seem to be working. Because it doesn't work, it puts the Iranian regime in a position where they are existentially threatened, and therefore they can have sort of plausible escalatory threats that they wouldn't have if we weren't trying to decapitate them, right? Like, if we weren't trying to decapitate them and they said, we're going to blow up all the energy infrastructure in the Gulf, we would say, no, you're not, because, that could bring down your own regime. But we are trying to bring down their regime, right? And I think the same, there's sort of two levels. The straight is one level where would they have closed the strait if we had just attacked their military and hadn't tried to decapitate them? I don't know. But it seems like the two were connected. And then clearly they're sort of secondary threats, or not secondary, but they're escalatory threats. They just have way more plausibility because we're trying to kill them all. And I think it's just, so far, it's you come at the king, you best not miss. If your strategy depends on changing the regime and you don't change the regime, you're in a position where they can make some pretty crazy threats because you've raised the stakes for them. So that's to the extent that I have like a personal narrative, that's my narrative of what, independent of whether the larger degrade their military campaign was a good idea, to the extent that things are not going well, that's the core problem.
Yeah, that tracks pretty much. We're pretty much aligned on this. I mean, Ken Pollack, I had him on the first week of this, or maybe even week before. No, I guess it was the first week. And he said, look, one of the things you have to keep in mind is that however much Trump thinks this is surgical and it's about getting a deal and doing this or that or the other thing or whatever the war goals are, the regime thinks it's an existential threat to their existence and they're going to act that way. And when you blow up the supreme leader and his wife and, and all sorts of other people, that's not an unreasonable position for the regime to take. It's like they think it's go time, right? And particularly when you have a religion or a branch of your religion that is already pretty apocalyptic and end-timey anyway, they're inclined to think that way. Yeah. So I agree with you.
And we're doing it. We're killing them, right? Yeah. So, we attacked their nuclear program.
These are the first two that I've heard, at least, address the religious aspect. And of course, Ross Douthat is. He's a devout Catholic. But yeah, what do we expect when a religion that believes in holy wars, when they get attacked and you're taking out their leadership, you are going to steal their resolve, and you're going to have people who would otherwise be anti-Ayatollah going, hey, you're trying to take us all out. You're trying to get rid of my civilization. Yeah, you're gonna piss some people who wouldn't ordinarily be pissed off. These guys, Trump regime, it is chock full of nuts.
And, I will say, I have always tended to be in the camp that is skeptical of, war with Iran. But at the point at which we attacked their nuclear program last summer, it did seem like it was a ripe moment for it. Their proxies were degraded. Their ability to sort of launch a wave of terror attacks across the Middle East was clearly weakened. And in the end, whether or not that attack worked to knock out their nuclear program, and, I guess the narrative now is it didn't, right? But whether or not it succeeded in that sense, it was successful in the sense that we delivered a serious blow to them and they just took it, right? And I think that's an indicator that there's room for non-existential warfare against Iran. But if you're killing their leaders, you're not doing that, and you're just changing the calculus for them.
All right, so this is a nerdy point, but you were one of the few nerds that I feel completely comfortable asking you about this.
I prefer spaz, honestly. Jonah, if we're gonna, go on.
Well, so I have been banging my spoon on my high chair about the misuse and abuse of the term regime for a very long time. And I can actually probably give you a chronology of how it's bad, like the how it happened. But the Clinton administration and then the Bush administration said the only real long-term solution for Iraq is regime change. Before that, there was the first thing about whether our regime was legitimate. And this was the world in which I grew up understanding what regime meant. Like, the American regime is the U.S. Constitution. It is not any one presidential administration. Since those events, you had John Kerry talking about how we need regime change at home, and Howard Dean. And then Republicans started using that language as well. I'm fast forwarding. DeSantis starts saying the Biden regime. And at this point, we talk about regimes as if they inhere in specific rulers. Now, in some countries, that's accurate. The Putin regime is the regime, right? Because it's a personalist regime. Right. But Donald Trump yesterday was saying we already have regime change in Iran.
Right.
Because what he means by that is we have leadership change insofar as the top rung has been liquidated. And so the seconds and thirds have moved up to the top, but it's still the same regime. Since I've spent nearly 20 years trying to obsesses about who and whom and fewer and less, I've lost this battle everywhere. But as a practical matter, this distinction will matter to Trump, right? Do you think he can pull off? First of all, do you think I'm being too fastidious? That's the nerdy question.
No. This is, I mean, to the extent that there's any case for using regime in the context of American politics that's separate from the U.S. Constitution, it only makes sense if you're talking about like a para-constitutional regime, right? So the right-wing claim that essentially a deep state has usurped constitutional powers, right? Would the term regime, agree with that or disagree with that? The term regime could make sense for that kind of critique, or a sort of leftist view that says, there's a plutocratic, tech bro dominance or something. It would never make sense in the American context, as far as I can see, for a specific president, even one like Trump, who has this kind of particular sort of personalist loyalty. And yeah, in Iran, there's, the change of regime would require the IRGC and clerical power to be, if not broken, at least transformed profoundly.
Right.
To say we have regime change. In Venezuela, it's a little bit different because it was more of just like a gangster clique.
Yeah, it was a thugocracy already.
Right. So it's like we changed thugs, and now now they deal with America. Maybe you could call that a regime change. I would not describe that as, we'll see what Venezuela looks like in 5 years, but I wouldn't describe that as a rank abuse of language. But saying we killed the Ayatollah and then we killed 10 other people, and, now somebody different is in charge and it's regime change is nonsense if the person who is in charge is an Islamist hardliner, right? You haven't, and more importantly, as far as I can tell so far, what has worked for the Iranians, and plenty of things haven't worked. We have, in fact, done incredible damage to them. But what has worked for them is a kind of decentralization of regime power, where, you have essentially commanders representing the regime who again, seemingly are making certain decisions on their own. And in this maybe makes it hard for the center to reassert control, but it enables the militarized theocracy to continue to exist, even if you keep cutting off its head. And as long as that's the case, there isn't regime change.
So I find it interesting. The debates on the right about all of this, I'm squarely in the middle. I've now written 3 different columns explaining how I'm in the middle on this.
You're a respectable centrist.
That's right. That's right. Which has been my reputation forever. And
it's you and Bronze Age pervert together holding down the respectable center of conservatism these days.
That's right. I mean, I'm the David Broder of conservatism. Anyway, a lot of my friends are talking past each other, I think. Like, there are people, dear friends who I respect a lot, who are very, very frustrated that the media and the naysayers and presumably me, but they're being diplomatic, aren't celebrating how successful this war has been so far. And they have a story to tell that is entirely plausible within the four corners of the story that they're telling. The problem is, as Andy McCarthy said the other day, who I'm very much on the same page with these days, we haven't lost a war militarily in like forever. I mean, like maybe since, I don't know, do we count the War of 1812 as a victory? I mean, like we don't lose, particularly in the modern era, we don't lose wars militarily. We lost Vietnam because of lack of will. We lost, the home front lost support, all these kinds of things. And so as long as the war is ongoing, it's fine to judge the war to a certain extent on a military basis. But the second wars end, for whatever reason, they're no longer judged as military operations. They're judged as geopolitical strategic things. And geopolitically, for the reasons you've written about and you were already talking about, is that the Iranians have an asymmetric advantage because of their position with the Strait of Hormuz or whatever. And meanwhile, we see the NATO alliance taking a really bad hit, relationships around the world take a bad hit, and politically, Trump is taking a bad hit. And my friends who want to say this war is being hugely successful just want to keep it on. Like, look how many ships they've sunk and how many planes they're down. And so people talk past each other and all that. But then you get what I will say is the non-conservative, but definitely this sort of the new right MAGA crowd, where some of them are conservative. I'll be generous. Who say this is a betrayal. And who say that what Trump is doing is a betrayal, and some go even crazier with conspiracy theories about the Jews and Israel and whatnot.
There are many such theories. Yes.
And says Ross Douthat of the Jew York Times, as we used to call it. But I guess the question I'm leading up to is one of the more interesting things about all of this is how the loudest voices on the sort of, from Tucker Carlson and rightward, they see this as a betrayal. And yet you look at the polling and the people who describe themselves as MAGA Republicans aren't going
the
with
most on board. They're the only people on board. It's
they're the only ones who are super on board.
On board.
I mean, generic Republicans are like in the 60s, 70s, I think but the people who describe themselves as MAGA.
I guess it's their job to make conversation and make it entertaining. But the bottom line is Trump is screwed. Okay. Ryan Bardwell is asking, do I think that Trump is bluffing? And my response is it only matters if he isn't bluffing. But in reality, if he does what he says he's going to do, war crime, okay, he is done. He is going to do something that is literally could possibly be an impeachable offense. You're not going to get immunity for a war crime if they choose to prosecute it. This is not within his duty to go in and hit civilian targets. It's just not. If he is bluffing, then the question is, why the fuck would he bluff? Why is he making these kind of hyperbolic, outlandish bluffs? Either way, Trump has screwed MAGA. And it's not quite the same thing, but it's kind of within the territory of Trump. This is the second Trump administration where he has undermined his own administration. First time it was mismanaging COVID. Now he's mismanaging a war that he started. So it doesn't matter whether he's bluffing or not. MAGA is pretty much on life support after this unnecessary aggression.
Republicans are 90. Trump says he saw some CNN poll that said 100%. I don't know if that's true, but like I saw one that said 90%. And so one of the salutary things I find about this moment is how it's demonstrated that Tucker and the new Megyn Kelly and Steve Bannon and various others actually aren't speaking for the mainstream MAGA base, never mind any, large numbers of constituencies. So I'm wondering, first of all, do you think that's right? But second of all, do you think that those sorts of people represent a future for the GOP in a way that maybe you wouldn't have? Is your understanding of how much they represent the future of the GOP changed since the outbreak of the Iran war? You can see how I'm egging you towards the other conversation.
Yeah, no, you've covered a lot of ground. Can I just say something about the case for military success? I know. Just on the military success point, on my own exciting podcast for the Times, I had on Mark Dubowitz, who is the head of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, longtime Iran hawk. And I thought that conversation was useful insofar as he's in the camp you describe of people who say, this is a military success, we need to focus on that. But he was also straightforward in saying, you have to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And he, we sort of danced around different options, and it was a conversation, that was maybe some of the things we talked about were edited because we went on a long time. But my impression from him was that, he was willing to say, look, you have to have a strategy to complete the military victory. You have to be able to open the strait. And I think that's basically right. And that's what I would like the sort of military victory people to generally acknowledge, that if there is a military or diplomatic mechanism to open the strait, and you open the strait and you combine that with the amount of damage done to Iran, then you have a good case, not an airtight case, but a good case that you can present that this was, whatever its costs was successful. But the whole debate is about whether there's any reasonable plan to open the strait that doesn't involve the U.S. getting embroiled in a ground war. And that to me is the whole question that the sort of divide you're describing turns on, right? The new right, yes. So clearly there is not a mass constituency for a politics that says we are extremely right-wing and MAGA, and we think the president has screwed up in a big way, which is the position of Carlson, Kelly, to some degree. I mean,
let me, and Ryan, you missed the beginning part of the show. We somewhat covered your point. The difference is with Bush Sr., Iraq was the aggressor into Kuwait. So that was obvious. The second one, at least George Bush Jr., whether he was lying, and it seems plausible that he was lying, at least he got the American public on board, and at least he had an actual attack to tie his lie to. Trump is literally just coming out and saying the quiet part out loud that this is basically all for oil, and we want to prevent them from getting to nukes is the little lie. Okay. This is a totally different scenario. What Trump has done in Iran isn't even close to what Bush Sr. did, definitely, and what Bush Jr. did. Again, there was 9/11 to tie it to. Trump has zero reason to do this other than Israel apparently put him up to it. That's having Israel as a partner and co-aggressor, nothing like what the Bushes did. So might want to rethink that comment.
Bannon maybe has gone back. I haven't followed all the permutations, but it's the position.
The smartest, most articulate version of this is Chris Caldwell, who I have enormous respect for.
Right,
I think he
he
had a really flawed
my
piece on this.
colleague at he's a contributor at the Times, but he didn't write that piece for the Times. Right, he wrote a piece for the Spectator saying this is Trump's betrayal of the core thing that people supported him around. And if you're looking at it in terms of what do people who identify as strong right wingers think. In polling, that doesn't seem to be the case. And that's important information. And it is suggestive of the way in which certain parts of the kind of, I don't even know what term you want to use, but we'll call it sort of new right populism, for want of a better term. Certain forms of new right populism clearly have a potent audience among high information podcast consumers. And that is quite different from a mass constituency. And that distinction is important. The question is though, like I guess, where does this go? Right? Because in a way you could say, well, is it really surprising that intense Republican partisans support a Republican president after like 2 weeks of war in which very few Americans have been killed? I mean, that's probably not that surprising, right?
Sure.
And you could say, therefore, that what's notable is that there isn't sort of a penalty for being against the president at this moment, right? You could say basically that there's lots of people who are listening to Megyn Kelly or Tucker, or for that matter, Matt Walsh, or, to pick different people, right? Who've been critical. People are sort of holding two things in their mind at the same time. They're like, I'm for Trump. I trust Trump. Trump's my guy. So I support the war. But I'm not like turning on the people who are criticizing him. I respect what they have to say. I'm interested in it. And so if that's the case, then it just sort of depends on how the war turns out, right? If the war turns out badly, or if Trump walks away in a way that leaves hawkish goals conspicuously incomplete, then I think sort of new right populists will be able to say, well, people trusted Trump and stuck with him, but in the end, sort of we were kind of proven right about this. And that will be a narrative with some potency. The other possibility, right, is, it may be that what we think of as that audience also just sort of overlaps more with kind of disaffected independents in the Joe Rogan sphere sometimes than it does with people who really strongly self-identify as Republicans, in which case maybe the people who watch or listen to Tucker and are disaffected with Trump just don't show up in polls as MAGA Republicans. They show up as like lukewarm Republicans or independents. But I'm not honestly, I'm basically sort of wandering
I think that's an interesting,
I'm really not, I'm not sure. I certainly though can see, I think this is for people who want to say Trump acted like a hawk and listened to Lindsey Graham and the base went along with him, and therefore, populism and, sort of restraint, realism, isolationism, whatever, these things are not actually going to be that potent in Republican politics. I think that I'm not sure that that's right. And I think so much depends on how the war turns out. And if the narrative of the war is, you can imagine a world where for the typical MAGA voter, the narrative of the war is, we went in and blew up some stuff and that was good, but the Israelis and the neocons wanted us to go further and Trump wisely pulled us back. Like, that's a narrative that spins forward into definitely a much less hawkish GOP future. I just don't know.
Yeah, look, I mean, Nick Katoja has done some good stuff on this. The eventual scapegoating of Israel is coming. How widespread it is, how much it's embraced, but there are signals even from within the White House that it's coming, and I think that's analytically, I think it's true. It's going to be an argument. Whether it becomes the consensus thing or not is completely different and unknowable at this point.
But that's also, can I ask you, like,
sure,
in terms of Israeli choices and Israeli thinking, and extending this to include, our mutual friends who are, very much focused on, being pro-Israel, or this is like a central thing in their politics. I mean, this war is a big risk.
Yep.
From the point of view of a kind of Zionist conservatism. And I asked Dubowitz about this, and his view was, it's a risk, but it's worth it because this is, Iran is such a threat and it's a once in a generation chance to deal with the threat and so on. And maybe that's true, right? But, when you say scapegoating, I mean, very clearly the Israeli government wanted the war and talked Trump into it. And so if it goes badly, it will be Trump's fault and it will be other people's fault, right? But if this goes really badly, I will be comfortable saying that it's, Benjamin Netanyahu's fault. It will be his fault, right? It won't be false to say that.
There's a lot going on in the phrase and talk.
Okay, that is absolutely fucking batshit crazy. Okay, if you blame this on Netanyahu, you're essentially saying he's running this country and he's making the decisions. Essentially, he's the commander-in-chief's commander-in-chief. Are you sure you want to go there, Ross? That is, wow. Benjamin Netanyahu basically got the United States into something it couldn't handle. Ooh, boy.
Him into it, right? Coming out of your mouth.
Let me pause and say I'm not doing the thing that you see people do, where strong Trump supporters who are like, Trump has no agency. It's Netanyahu's war, and so no, this is Trump's war, 100%. Trump gets Trump. In the context of American politics, Trump gets the blame and should. It's not like the Jews tricked him or something. But would Trump have gone to war without, like, Benjamin Netanyahu arguing that this is going to work?
Okay, I'm sorry. That isn't any better. You're still saying Trump wouldn't have done it if Netanyahu hadn't convinced him? Dude, I'm absolutely sure that if Netanyahu convinced Trump, it was against his advice. We've already heard that the vice president, who, whether he was a photojournalist or not, at least he can say he was a Marine. He was not on board with this, and you will never convince me that the top admirals and generals were on board with this. Ross, you are still in the hole you dug for yourself.
I'm skeptical.
For sure. I think that's fair. And you can do it in reverse. What if Netanyahu had said, this won't work, now's not the time? Would Trump still have done it? Pretty unlikely, right?
Pretty unlikely.
It's not a zero likelihood thing, because Trump had done that tweeting that we're coming to rescue the Iranian people, and which was really a terrible thing to do. But I think we're agreed.
Yeah. I think part of the story is, as I understand,
this is what these weirdo conservatives come up with. They can't just come right out and go Trump fucked up. They gotta equivocate and they got to waffle. Dude, it is 100% Trump's fault. Blaming Netanyahu, that's just a bigger embarrassment, to be honest, at least from someone who is actually a veteran. The last thing I would ever want to hear is that I'm going to war because Benjamin Netanyahu convinced the commander-in-chief this was the right course. Dude, that is just, ugh.
Stand it that Trump,
our leadership is being led, apparently,
had sort of drawn a kind of quasi red line with the Iranians, and that one of the arguments that he was convinced by was that you have to enforce your red lines, and that's a little bit different from the view that this will be a successful coup or something. But
yeah,
anyway,
look, I think that's fair. I think you can make the case, or you make the analogy. It's not a great analogy. It's, let's just say, like all historical analogies, it can be picked apart. But if you want to say Bibi talked Trump into this in the way that Churchill talked FDR into getting into the war, okay, it was like definitely in England's interest,
really,
for America to be in there.
So this is a Churchill Roosevelt moment, dude. These guys sound like fucking morons. Oh my God. These two were supposed to be like the conservative or the right. These two were legitimately, supposedly right-wing intelligentsia. Oh my God, this is just horrible.
Allies. It took a certain event, Pearl Harbor, to finally get FDR to go all in, but like he was heading there anyway. We don't have to do the full Charles Beard thing.
It's not wrong to talk a U.S. president into a war if the war is a good idea. I agree.
Right.
Oh, yes,
So
it
like
is.
that far, I think that's right. Okay, but at the same time, as with many things involving the Jews and Israel, every time you move the reasonable rhetoric a little bit, the leash for crazy anti-Semitism stuff gets longer too, and the Overton window for rhetoric goes with it, and we're just going to see a lot the That's all. That was all I was saying about that.
We're not going to see. We are already seeing it.
Yes,
I
should say a lot more.
I think that the thing, there's 7 levels of worry about the war. Global economic crisis, crack up of U.S. alliances. I can give you a long list. I just see this kind of I can see this dynamic forming of crazy anti-Semitism, but that is fed by something where the Israeli government is profoundly involved in the decision making. That's fair. In a way that is, I think goes beyond just I think that the claim that Israel, we're both around for the Iraq War, right? And there were factions in Israeli politics that supported the Iraq War, and there were factions that opposed it. And we did not launch the Iraq War for reasons profoundly connected to Israel. They were connected to Israel in some ways, but that narrative, the narrative that says this was
the Joe Kent narrative is horse.
Right.
That's
right.
Put it bluntly.
But in this case, there is just a much closer alignment between what the Israeli government wants and what we're doing. And I just see that interacting. If I would like this war to end well for many reasons, but that combination is one of them.
In a climate where people increasingly will blame Israel for bad weather, when Israel's actually involved in a war, it's going to lend more credence. So I agree with you on that. The question I have, though, is and this is I had lots of different, and again, I love Chris Caldwell, and I'm grateful for the piece because he's the guy to actually write the thinking man's version of what a lot of unthinking people were saying about a lot of stuff. The problem is I just think even the thinking man's version of it is wrong. And I have lots of analytical disagreements with Caldwell's piece, but on the fundamental premise was that this, as it was in the title of the piece, is that this was a betrayal, right? Or I guess in the title was the end of Trumpism. But the thesis was that this was a betrayal. We hear this from Tucker, we hear this from Bannon, we hear this from all sorts of people, and I think that's nonsense. I think this is what Trumpism looks like. I think this is not a deviation from Trumpism. This is just another manifestation of Trumpism. But there are people, I mean, so do you think this is inconsistent in any way? Or in any, actually, you can find quotes from him on the campaign trail, to be sure. But the people who say, the same people who are saying this is a betrayal, like Steve Bannon, are also the people who've been saying for 10 years that Donald Trump is the modern Andrew Jackson. And you don't have to be Walter Russell Mead to point out that Andrew Jackson liked kicking the shit out of people and enemies from time to time. He was definitely a rubble doesn't make trouble kind of guy before the days we could really make rubble at scale. So the idea, you can't say the guy's Andrew Jackson and say, hey, wait a second, how dare you attack an enemy that's been yelling death to America for 47 years. I just don't think it's inconsistent with the Trump we knew. I wasn't surprised by it in the way a lot of people were surprised. And I'm wondering, since you are more fluent in that language of the betrayal part of it, what do you think?
I was a little bit surprised by it. And I do think,
I should say surprised, not shocked. You know what I mean? That's one of these distinctions we've had to come up with in the Trump era.
I mean, nothing shocks me, Jonah. I'm unshockable at this stage. But I was don't say that, man. Damn it. What have we done? Monkey's paw curls. I was surprised by not that Trump attacked Iran, but that he attacked Iran on this scale. My read of Trump had always been, yes, he's a Jacksonian. He's not a pacifist. He's not an isolationist in any kind of conventional definition of the term. You know, the idea that he was going to retreat to the Western Hemisphere, right? That has been very popular among some critics of his administration from the start. I always thought didn't make sense. Like, you just had to look around. Trump wants to be able to throw his weight around on the world stage. He wants to be, you know, he likes authoritarian figures, but he wants to be respected alongside them. And that requires being a global power. And so the fact that he would bomb Iran is not surprising. He killed Soleimani, right? He kills an Iranian general in his first term, right? Which is something that, you know, other presidents might not have done. I've just always thought of him as someone who is fundamentally wary of overcommitment and getting trapped, and that he wants off ramps, he wants exits, he wants to be able to pull the plug immediately if something isn't going wrong or isn't going right.
And he thought he could. I mean, he how many times has he said this was going to be a Venezuela model thing? I think that's what he thought.
Right, and I guess that just, you know, that maybe is down to what people around him.
What on earth would dude, I can't even fathom how anyone over the age of 15 that has dude, I was going to say who has cracked open a history book, but just living your life. Let's just say someone who didn't have Trump's pedigree, and whether I like to admit it or not, is ignorant and is just out to lunch as Trump is. He has been exposed to Ivy Leagues, an Ivy League education. He has lived in New York City forever. He was born there. What in his mind would lead him to believe that a Catholic country like Venezuela would be culturally similar and react the same way as a Middle Eastern country like Iran. That is so out to lunch that I can't even fathom that level of stupidity. Is it people or people? Is that how you come up with that kind of conclusion?
We're saying, or sort of, or maybe it's just down to some combination of what people were willing to say to him and his own post-Venezuela hubris. Because I think clearly there's a post-Venezuela, like,
for sure,
we can, we have a new model of quick, easy regime change, right? And this is, whatever, there's this debate back and forth about, did Mossad or the Israeli government really tell him that they thought we could do a quick regime change? Or did they always tell him it was a multi-month process? Who knows what the truth is? I'm sure Trump believed we could do a quick regime change. I'm sure he believed that. But I guess I was surprised that he talked himself into this depth of commitment, where, you are sort of, you were removing your off-ramps. And again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Once you're trying to kill the regime, you're removing off-ramps. And I guess he just, he didn't believe that or want to believe that. But that is sort of what surprised me. And then the betrayal aspect, again, it's like, as always, what are you reading to mean? What is Trumpism, right? You can follow a thread of Donald Trump's rhetoric back to the 1980s, where he is a baby boomer who lived through the Iran hostage crisis and always wanted to get back at Iran. And you can find, you can find tape of him talking about Karg Island.
I know.
In the 1980s. And in that sense, there's no betrayal. Nobody should have been surprised. But look, he also very concretely built up a narrative. He didn't just allow it to be built up. He built up a narrative himself where he was, the guy to vote for if you didn't want to be embroiled in the Middle East the way his predecessors had been. He picked a vice president who did have very concrete and specific views about the risks of American intervention. And, we have a certain amount of behind the scenes.
After he was bullied out of picking Rubio or Burgum, but yeah, okay.
Well, but if what does this mean? If Trump is bullied into, he picked him, right? And he picked.
Yeah, he picked him. He decided to go to war. He decided to pick J.D. Vance.
Put it this way: in his first term, he had a lot of much more conventional Republican hawks in his administration, and he was often sort of in tension with them, trying to pull troops out of theaters like Syria or Afghanistan, facing resistance from sort of the institutions, the military, sometimes Republican hawks. He famously did not go along with John Bolton at a moment when Bolton thought we were going to bomb Iran and Trump pulled the plug. And then in his second term, he put many more people in positions of power, from the vice president through the Defense Department and the State Department, through, the director of national intelligence, right? He made a bunch of personnel choices that meant term one, Trump was at war with the hawks often. Term two, he had more sort of non-hawks, non-neoconservatives. Yeah. Why would you expect, couldn't you say, looking at that narrative, you should not expect this to happen? I think you could.
Well, you could say it for sure. Here's where I think is the fundamental problem with that analysis. It's not that it's not true. It's that it projects the idea that Trump is about ideas of any kind onto him. And if you like those restrainer ideas, you find the evidence really compelling because your people are in there. I'm not saying you, I just mean in the abstract, right? I can name 20 people this applies to.
Yeah, but I'm sympathetic to not all, but some of those views. Yes.
Right. So the criteria for joining this administration was not whether you were a restrainer or not. It was whether you were willing to be, first and foremost, an absolute compliant loyalist to Donald Trump. And it turned out the people from the restrainer world were, because they were outsiders in the GOP establishment of old, we're disproportionately available to fill those kinds of slots. Pam Bondi isn't there because of her views of the law at all. She's there because she's a yes woman to Donald Trump. You can go through that cabinet and very few of those people, Rubio is probably an exception. Hegseth is there because he was a total toady to Trump and because he likes blowing stuff up.
And he's good on TV.
But none of that has to do with ideas.
Good is a debatable proposition.
Right.
He is on TV.
And he's on TV in a way that Trump likes, right? And so this is sort of in miniature my problem with all of these analyses is that Donald Trump has no compelling ideological priors. He has a few ideas about what we should do that would show strength, that would be smart, that kind of stuff. He has some potted ideas about tariffs. He wants Carg Island, right? But here's the broader question, which I think I think your analysis is problematic for me, is that the people who are against going into Iran were against going into Iran before we went into Iran in any form, in any way, right? They just like restrainer. This is not what no forever wars. For all they knew, it could have been a Venezuela model redux and been a quick mowing the lawn operation and get out. They were still against it in a way that they weren't against Venezuela. They weren't against Trump's talking about making Canada the 51st state. They weren't against Trump talking about using force to take Greenland. They are not per se opposed to Trump being a bull in a china shop, taking territory, asserting himself, being Jacksonian, until it comes to something that involves Israel and the Middle East. And then all of a sudden, they fall back to these pretextual arguments about restraint and say this is a betrayal. I would have a lot more respect for Steve Bannon and a lot of these people if they thought Venezuela was a betrayal. If they thought talking about taking Canada, annexing Canada was a betrayal. If they thought about the Greenland thing as a betrayal, but they thought that was funny. They thought that was cool. They wanted to let Trump be Trump. And then when Trump is Trump once again, when it comes to Iran, they're like, whoa, this is a first order betrayal. This is not what he was elected for. And I don't find it persuasive at all.
I mean, I'm not going to defend every sort of podcasting and influencer some of which have the flavor that you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that, from
I love making from reasonable New York Times columnists have to defend crazy right wingers.
I'll just speak for myself. Just only for myself, right? As someone who thought I thought Trump's foreign policy in his first term was surprisingly effective, much more effective than I thought. And I thought it was effective in part because I thought there was a kind of dynamic interaction between Trump's instincts, which were different from any other recent president and were like Jacksonian plus, like, why are we overcommitted, mixed with the national security establishment.
Pompeo, Pence, all those guys, yeah.
Right, trying to sort of work through and around him, but that yielded some of the things that, I, as a skeptic of certain kinds of like hawkish maximalism, thought were good things. That it is,
I think that's
good.
a defensible point.
The U.S. should be getting NATO to, do a lot more stuff. The U.S. is not in a position to fight wars in the Middle East, Ukraine, and China simultaneously. And we need, while we're rebuilding our defense base, we need to reprioritize, right? And so on through that list. And so if you look at things Trump has done in the second term, I mean, look, I think the Greenland stuff is just, you can treat it as a joke or not. It is fundamentally indefensible and can only be defended as a like sort of, oh, he's just joking or something.
But I don't think he was joking.
And the defense, no, he wasn't joking. Of course not. I mean, he's Trump, right? He was
testing.
He's never fully committed to something, but certainly he was sincere. Which is, again, I would be fine with the U.S. buying Greenland, by the way. In fact, I would support it. But threatening our NATO allies and threatening to seize Greenland is indefensible. I think, though, that the sort of restraint-friendly view of Trump prior to 4 weeks ago in the second term, apart from Greenland, would be to say, we took a risk in Venezuela, but it was a high upside, low downside risk. If it had failed, we would have been in the same position we were in to begin with. And in the event seemed to modestly succeed, it required no commitment of U.S. troops, no occupation, nothing like that, right? Same with the bombing of Iran's nuclear program. It was hawkish, Jacksonian, but inherently limited. We were not overcommitted, and it was an example of sort of, Jacksonian means to realist ends. And then at the same time, you would say the other thing that's in this mix is Russia-Ukraine, right? Where a lot of the people that you're criticizing for being sort of Israel focused were also, ended up like sometimes almost obsessively anti-Ukraine,
sure,
anti-Zelensky. And, there's some issues related to Jewish questions there too. But that was sort of its own separate thing. I would say personally, I thought the sort of anti-Ukraine right view went way too far. But where the Trump administration has actually ended up over the last year of basically trying to get Europe to do more of the work supporting Ukraine, trying to negotiate a deal, but not just like taking any deal. And obviously the war is still ongoing. And I think that's a defensible view too. And you could say, you're getting like the mixture of Trump threatening to abandon Ukraine, which gets you more European buy-in. And in the end, the US sort of gets to recalibrate. But we don't just, Russia has not taken over Ukraine. It's working out okay. What makes Iran different at the moment is just like the scale of the risk that we've undertaken. Trump has not added new risk substantially in Russia-Ukraine. He didn't add that.
Now, once again, raw stout that I don't know whether it's reflex, because I find it when Ryan, for instance, when I get into, the back and forth political discussions with Ryan, I cannot figure out whether it's reflex that even when you're criticizing Trump, you wind up kind of defending him at the same time. It's just like, it's kind of like a fear or a reflex. It's like, dude, call the dumb son of a bitch out. Okay. You're talking about the level of risk that Trump undertook. How about call it just a goddamn boneheaded idea? There was no reason to even take the risk. There is no upside to what Trump did and is doing and has done. There is zero upside to this. There never was. There was zero upside to Bush Jr. going into Iraq. There is nothing good that came out of Iraq, but like I told Ryan earlier, at least you could kind of pretend it might have had something to do with 9/11. There is no upside to what has happened. This notion that there was an existential threat, 10 years down the line when Iran could possibly maybe get a nuclear weapon, literally there is zero upside to this. There never was. Other than Iran, people have been pissed off with Iran ever since 1979 when they took the hostages. It was 1979. These Lindsey Grahams and all these neocons have just been pissed off with Iran ever since. They were pissed off with Barack Obama for making a deal. They were pissed off with Barack Obama for basically making peace with Cuba. The commies are a traditional threat. The Iran, the Ayatollah, and the Iran Revolutionary Guard, that whole Iran revolution, is a traditional neocon. The only way to deal with commies and, the Ayatollah is to bomb Iran. That's it. It was neocons and fucking anti-commie neocons. And the only way to deal with these guys is to bomb them back into the Stone Age. And fucking Trump took the bait. If anything, I wouldn't even blame Netanyahu. I'd fucking blame Lindsey Graham and the ghost of McCain. But this excuse that there was ever a reason to do this, and Trump took a gamble, the risk is extraordinary. Motherfucker, there was no reason to go into Iran whatsoever. None whatsoever.
At much risk with Venezuela. He didn't add that much risk bombing the nuclear program. He's added tons of risk here. The risk we've already talked about, and also just the risk of, the U.S. doesn't have that many weapons, right?
Yeah, look, I don't dispute all that.
There's put it this way, if you're concerned, if you're not an isolationist, but you are want to be realist, and you're like, the big thing is like U.S. versus China for the long term, what we're doing in the Persian Gulf right now is just a bigger problem for any plan to
that's fine.
So that's the argument, basically, that Trump did non-restrainer things, but he didn't do non-restrainer things at this scale with this risk. And so it's different.
Yeah. As is your want, you want to make serious arguments about something that I don't think are necessarily apropos when talking about Trump. Because
but they're apropos when talking about the people. Like, there are actual people trying to run American national security. Like, forget the podcasters and influencers for the moment, right? There's a group of figures around Trump who have their own different sets of views. Vance, Rubio, and their subordinates, right? And they represent sort of, Vance and Rubio are friendly and have, I think, more in common than some people think. But obviously Rubio is more hawkish and Vance less so, right? But both of them made a calculation when they went to work for Trump, right? That essentially you could have whatever the best version of their own preferred foreign policies were, you could get that through Trump. Mm-hmm. And I think both of them in different ways could have made a case that they were doing a pretty good job a couple months ago. And that case is in trouble right now.
Sure,
whether you're the more hawkish side of Rubio or the more dovish side of Vance.
I agree with that entirely. That's perfectly fine.
That's the limit of my argument.
Yeah, if we're talking about criminology within the greater White House administration, apparatus, and the people who are thinking about futures in politics and different factions of the GOP, all of that is fine. I don't dispute on that. To me, the idea of watching for 10 years now a bull in a china shop smash one thing after another, and then all of a sudden be like, how dare that bull smash that vase? We wanted to keep that vase, is ridiculous. It's just utterly ridiculous. And the idea that
but they aren't even, I mean, the podcasters, the influencers, whatever, they don't want to criticize Trump.
Oh, I think they're cowards.
It's more like, how could Benjamin Netanyahu make the bull?
Right. No, exactly. Right.
Right.
Benjamin Netanyahu is the bull whisperer in this analogy, right? So, but the serious people, the Colbys and all these people that you're talking about, and the people who work for them and all the rest, they put out a document, about the U.S. national security strategy. Mm-hmm. And then virtually every significant thing in foreign policy that Trump did after that was either like wholly not mentioned. Like, I don't think the word Greenland was in the national security strategy. Certainly doing this with Iran wasn't mentioned in it. Like, it's the idea of, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I've been writing this for 10 friggin' years. Trumpism is not an ideology. It's a psychological and sociological phenomenon. And the idea of trying to impose a single coherent worldview on what Trump is going to do or what Trumpism means, I just think is a fool's errand. And I think this Iran thing is a demonstration of that. And the protest about it, to a certain extent, is a comeuppance for people who thought all that other stuff he did, that was extraneous. But the true core of Trumpism is X. And now he's showing that it's not.
Let me make one quick point to my buddy Ryan, who is just willing to go out on all kinds of historical ledges. So we were talking in the chat about the hostages that were taken by Iran, the Revolutionary Guard or whatever the hell they were. And I was saying that, what is happening in Iran is basically, the ghost of McCain is dancing to the tune of Bomb, 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 Bomb Iran. Remember that hot mic take? Lindsey Graham, who happened to have been McCain's neocon boyfriend, who was playing the guitar when, Bomb, 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 Bomb Iran was playing on the radio. And Ryan Bardwell's response is, and Ryan, by the way, I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about Ryan Manioni, the other Ryan, who makes excuses for MAGA and Trump just reflexively. Even when he's criticizing Trump, he's defending Trump. I don't know how he does it, but it takes real talent. But you'll do, because you do kind of the same thing. So your response is that Reagan basically, Reagan made it right as far as the hostages back in 1979. They released him like January 1 or whenever it was of 1980. So here is what fucking, this is how Reagan fixed it. He did arms for hostages, refers to the secret U.S. policy during the Reagan administration in which arms were sold to Iran in exchange for the release of American hostages held by Hezbollah in Lebanon. So we're not talking about the hostages who were held in Iran. We're talking about another way that fucking Reagan would go in and deal with Hezbollah, which, if you'll recall, pretty much financed by Iran. These neocons have caused much trouble during their heyday, and this current incursion into Iran is kind of like the best hits, where the ghost of McCain and his neocon boyfriend Lindsey Graham have had it out for Iran and Hezbollah and all those terrorists, the biggest state sponsor of terrorism. It's all coming out in the wash. Cuba is in there, and it all, some of the locus is around Barack Obama, who made deals with both of the traditional neocon, rogues gallery. So this bullshit about Reagan making it right, dude, pick up a goddamn history book and then pick up, some books about politics and neocons and all that sort of stuff. You sound ridiculous. Okay, and you can say I like isms and all that stuff. I'm not whistling Dixie. This shit actually happens, and this is just the latest neocon debacle. So enough of that. And one of the few things that Jonah Goldberg is getting right in this video is MAGA is not in a coherent ideology or foreign policy or anything like that. It is an attitude. It is a fucked up, uneducated, fly by the seat of your pants Trump goes on instinct sort of movement. And unfortunately, the military is having to pay some prices for Trump's folly. That's what this is going to probably be known as, Trump's folly. The price of being Jacksonian is Trump's own version of a trail of tears. I guess he's going to fucking march the Iranians, to somewhere in another country, or some sort of civilizational rearrangement. Jackson marched the Cherokees out of Georgia to Oklahoma eventually, and Trump, I guess, is going to eliminate the Persians. This is just some of the stupidest shit.
Not X either, because there is no ideological core to Trumpism.
Let's make a distinction. Yeah, there's no true Trumpism here that has been betrayed. There is an ongoing attempt by people who
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. I'm being told that I'm not accurate. Dude, it's not accurate because you have no clue what I'm talking about. How could it be accurate if I'm quoting shit you don't know anything about? Of course it's not accurate to your knowledge. Know what I know, and you can maybe make a better assessment.
Are more responsible than Trump. And again, this encompasses everyone from Mike Pence to Elbridge Colby, even though Mike Pence and Elbridge Colby have very different worldviews, but they are both more responsible than Trump and have more responsible views of what foreign policy looks like than Trump. So in the first term, there was an attempt to basically sort of work with Trump's impulses and tendencies in a way that yielded a good outcome for foreign policy.
He's leading
and
by
that's what people tried to do in the first term. And that's what, again, in different ways, Colby and Rubio, again, taking them as polls instead of Vance and Rubio, Colby and Rubio are trying to do in the second term. And a document like the National Security Strategy, it's not actually channeling Trump's id. It's saying, here's a strategy, and we think Trump's, instincts, impulses, and so on can work with it. And I agree with you. I think that Iran's, at the moment, we'll see where we are when this airs, right? This is the moment when that effort has sort of come closest to just ending in disaster. And some of it is like, I think there's also just a narrative of, the narrative of.
Thanks, CKJ3. Well, I've just been informed. This is hot off the presses, brought to you by the CKJ3, the intrepid reporter. And I see that Dirty Dude just heard, or just heard as well. So Trump suspends Iran attack for 2 weeks, subject to Hormuz Strait opening. So President Trump on Tuesday said he agreed to suspend planned attacks on Iranian infrastructure for 2 weeks. This is breaking news. Let's see. So we'll see how that conclusion got, how this came about. But 2 weeks, dude, I can tell you right now. Oh, this is funny. So Heather Delaney Reese just dropped this. So this is just from 3 minutes ago. Heather Delaney Reese says, thrilled to hear that he tacoed once again, but we can't keep living like this. The world can't keep living like this. He must be removed from office. Yeah, this is actually not a good thing. Nothing says free the Iranian people quite like announcing their whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. And yes, Trump voters, you did vote for this. Yeah, she's kind of right about that. This is just really, this dude has us all living on the edge of our seats. It is kind of exciting if you like politics, I guess. So we'll finish this dispatch thing out, and then we'll reassess. Trump, like Ryan calls him, Trumpy. Trumpy.
Of hubris, right? Which is that
sure.
a Trump foreign policy works.
The ceasefire,
psychological impulses and sometimes maniacal impulses can be constrained and channeled, and they can be constrained and channeled as long as he's afraid of things going to shit. And at a certain point, it's a second term. He gets on a roll, and he thinks he's. I wrote about my first column about Iran. Basically, said you could see it sort of in continuity with just like how Trump approached U.S. politics, right? It's like he felt like he took the measure of the Republican establishment and crushed them in 2016. And he took the measure of the liberal establishment and they beat him for a while, but eventually he beat them. And now he's taken the measure of the world and he thinks he can, he thought he could do to Maduro what he did to like Ted Cruz and Scott Walker. And he was right. And then he thought he could do to the Iranian regime the same thing. And maybe this is the moment when, when Nemesis shows up. Pending him having, the other thing about Trump is that he has a lot of luck.
Again, this is literally the MAGA, and Ross Douthat says he's not MAGA, but once again, he's doing that Ryan Mannioni thing where he's just, while he's defending Trump while criticizing Trump. He's treating Trump like, oh, hey, he was doing well, and then he finally met his match. Dude, Trump is a goddamn maniac, and it's soft soap individuals like you who are just fucking making excuses. The man is horrible. Stop defending him. When you criticize, you defend. This is that. How about just say the dude is awful and be done with it? Trump is a fucking embarrassment. Okay. Barack Obama used to get criticized for setting red lines and then not going along with the red line. Trump is even worse than Obama about, I'm going to do this at this deadline and then not doing it. As I said, Ryan, what did I say? You asked me if I thought Trump would do it. And my response was, does it really matter? Or it only matters if he doesn't. Well, he didn't do it, so it matters. The world sees this shit. The world knows that Trump is he's going to say crazy shit, and then he's not going to do it. Dude, this is not setting a good precedent. How does this make America look tough? I keep hearing these MAGA folks say, well, America is respected again. How are we respected? We're getting planes shot out of the sky. We're saying we're going to do shit, not doing it. And yeah, it would have been a war crime. It would have been fucked up if he had done what he said he was going to do. But it's also fucked up if he says he's going to do it and doesn't do it. Trump has basically tore MAGA up from the floor up. Y'all are looking like fools. And you know what? All of you are MAGA blacks. Ryan, you are a MAGA black too. Trump is showing grace. Oh wow, you are the Ross Douthat of the chat right now, Ryan. You are such a loving president. Oh yeah, and then Kelvin is saying Trump did a pump fake. Dude, Iran didn't open the goddamn straits. The straits are not open. Or wait, hold it. Let me reread this. Trump on Tuesday said he agreed to suspend attacks on Iranian infrastructure for 2 weeks. Did they open the Straits of Hormuz? Well, one interesting thing that, and it seems to be holding true, that anytime the markets react negative to his deadlines, seems like the only thing that can control Trump are the markets. So the markets reacted badly. And the conspiracy theory, and I'm beginning to kind of go, well, this makes sense. Trump is basically doing this shit to the market so his buddies can make money. So I wonder, I might start giving that a little bit more credence. Trump is just riding these markets, probably making money. He's shorting shit. He tells his friends, hey, I need you to short these oil stocks. Oh, man. Yeah, we got MAGA needs to MAGA. Yeah, this is going to be that one populist movement that's just going to go into the dustbin of history. We don't need any more MAGA.
Right?
Yes, no, that's the problem.
He has a lot of.
He is
he
the
has a
millionth
lot of-
monkey banging on typewriters. That's the problem.
Or there's like a Hegelian, like bizarro spirit of history, right? Where Trump is, Trump.
He's Napoleon on a horse at Jena. I don't see it.
I'm not on a horse, right? But he's a figure in whom certain things are expressed and furthered, and at some point that process will end. But until it does, he gets like the dice roll his way, and I don't want to be there when they stop rolling his way. But I'm just saying, he could still luck out here. We'll see.
That's entirely true. I am guilty of baiting and switching my audience here because I said we were going to get to this other disagreement that we had, and now we just really don't have time. Because I promised you a hard out and I have a hard out as well, but
I'll come back. I mean, they wanted us to disagree about whether, at least my view of the.
Okay. So 12th Man is saying 2-week ceasefire and reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. I don't see that part of it. The New York Times is saying President Trump announced a deal with Iran shortly before his deadline for Iran to agree to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face the death of a whole situation. Iran hasn't opened the Straits of Hormuz. Reached 11th ceasefire hours after Iranians did not allow. The agreement was announced by hours after Pakistan, mediator in the dispute, urged Trump to stand down. Pakistan proposed that each side observe a 2-week ceasefire, and during that time, Iran allow oil, gas, and other vessels to proceed unmolested through the. Okay, so let's see if that works. Iran accepted Pakistan's 2-week ceasefire proposal. So it was the new Ayatollah that approved it. Trump said that the agreement was subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to a complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, meaning that Iran has not yet agreed to conditions. So Iran accepted the 2-week ceasefire. Okay, well, let's see if they open the Straits of Hormuz. I'm still unclear whether the Straits of Hormuz are open, but we will find out here shortly. So, the Persian culture has a reprieve. So we shall see. So let's finish this up. And then I have one more thing to talk about before I go that's unrelated to this drama.
The movement that starts, with Buckley in the 50s, it's at an end in the Trump era, and whatever comes next may still be informed by that kind of conservatism, but there'll be sort of a break there. And honestly, Jonah, I think that's going to be up for debate for a little while to come.
For sure. Yeah.
So I'm happy to come back and talk about that.
Fair enough. Yeah. And my only point is that and my core disagreement was just simply that in all of the various scenarios, which you you caveated and you said time will tell and it's unknowable.
No idea what's going to happen.
Yeah. So, but the core of your analysis was where the Trumpian mantle in effect goes. And I think it is highly debatable about whether the Trumpian mantle is something that that people will want, or that will be wise to try and take, or that any one person will get it. And the secondary point, it was just that the story that you hypothesize, the easiest historical rebuttal to it is just simply, that's not how it worked with Nixon and Reagan. Nixon won 49 states in 72. No one and then he was impeached or threatened with resigned. No one wanted the Nixon mantle. No one campaigned for the Nixon mantle. This guy who had this massive new coalition, and Reagan, in effect, he never criticized Nixon, but he also didn't run to be another Nixon. And his worldview was, I'm actually, and again, I'm not going to pronounce, I'm just going to read what's here, but I'm still not, 12th man, I'm still not clear. The deadline, the way this Tuesday deadline worked is the Straits of Hormuz will be opened by 8 p.m. or we attack. Well, it sounds like what Pakistan is negotiated is the Straits of Hormuz be closed for 2 more weeks. They just pushed the deadline out 2 weeks. Okay, President Trump warned a whole civilization by 5 p.m. Okay, this is reading right here that Trump, they asked President Trump to extend the deadline by 2 weeks. So the deadline we were talking about was open the Straits of Hormuz. So does this mean the Straits of Hormuz are closed for 2 more weeks? That's unclear to me. So I think Trump, the way this reads, I'm not clear that the Straits of Hormuz are open. profoundly different.
So I could be
Ideologically
wrong though.
from the Nixonian worldview. And so my only point is I don't think Trump is going to be popular at the end of his term. He's not popular now. He didn't end his last term popular. And this idea that the mantle of conservatism will reside in who can claim to be the inheritor of Trumpism, I'm just not, I don't find it all that persuasive.
Yeah, I think there's two questions. One question is Trumpism, like as something people call Trumpism, right? The question of like who is the inheritor? I think things would have to get much worse than they are now for Trump's political position, and they might. But I think they'd have to get much worse than they are right now for there not to be a 4 to 8 year period in the Republican Party where sort of being seen as an heir to Trump and not a repudiation of him is not really important for becoming the Republican nominee and leading the party. That will end at some point. But I think the extent of the identification with Trump among Republican voters is such that, things would just have to get a lot worse. It's not enough for him to leave office unpopular with the country as a whole. He did that once already. You'd have to just get more damage before you could have someone who is like clearly a post-Trump figure taking over. That's one point. I don't disagree that in the longer run, there will be these, sort of the leader of the Republican Party in 8 years may not be sort of Trumpy in various ways. I also think, though, that Trump has succeeded, and this is where we disagree to some degree, I think, in ways that fit into our earlier conversation. But Trump is sui generis. He is, he's a celebrity figure and so on. But, the sort of nationalism and populism that he has ridden to power is visible all over the developed world.
All right. Well, let's see if this actually works.
This is CNN breaking news.
And President Trump has just posted that he has agreed to that 2-week ceasefire in the war in Iran. Let's bring
And the volume is low
at the White House. Kristen, what's the news?
Yeah, just an hour and a half away from that deadline, President Trump seconds ago taking to Truth Social to say that he is talking to Pakistani officials. And based on that conversation, he will agree to stop bombing for 2 weeks. He also says that Iran has agreed to open the Strait of Hormuz for that time period. So I'm going to read part of this to you. It says, he says, subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. So they still have to agree. I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. This will be a double-sided ceasefire. The reason for doing so is that we have already met and exceeded.
Okay, so it sounds like Iran still needs to agree. If they're smart, they will, but who knows? But I also want to point out who approved on the Iranian side. It's the new Ayatollah. So that regime change part, we're going to have to see how that goes.
All military objectives and are very far along with the definitive agreement concerning long-term peace with Iran and peace in the Middle East. We received a 10-point proposal from Iran and believe it is a workable basis on which to negotiate. That's also news, Jake. Almost all of the various points of past contention have been agreed to between the United States and Iran, but a 2-week period will allow the agreement to be finalized and consummated. On behalf of the United States of America as president and also representing the countries of the Middle East, it is an honor to have this long-term problem to a resolution. So a couple of things that we're going to still be asking questions about. What is in that 10 proposal? What has actually been agreed to? And I will go back through that language because I said that Iran had agreed to open the Strait of Hormuz. It does sound as though he's still leaving it there as that he's only agreeing, if that is in fact the case, that they will fully open the Strait of Hormuz. This, of course, again, coming as President Trump has been threatening to wipe out an entire civilization, saying that he was going to bomb bridges, to bomb civilian infrastructure, saying at one point that the Iranian people wanted him to continue bombing. And we knew behind the scenes that there were ongoing conversations, negotiations between the two parties, between Pakistan was serving as an intermediary between the two countries at various times. Now, there is going to be a big question here as to what happens with J.D. Vance, the vice president, who's currently in Hungary. There had been a lot of talk 2 weeks ago about him going to Pakistan to sit for these conversations that would be the first face-to-face conversations between U.S. officials and Iranian officials. Now, of course, is going to be a question as to whether or not he is going to actually go there after his trip to Hungary. We are asking about that as well. Are they actually going to have these in-person conversations, which they have not had yet? But right now, evading that deadline, evading potential war crimes, because, of course, that is what we were hearing from the United Nations, from various countries, saying that his actions, if he was to take them to bomb the civilian infrastructure, would be considered war crimes in international law. Avoiding all of that and saying that he's going to give this 2-week grace period of a double ceasefire, of course, as long as Iran continues to leave the Strait of Hormuz open or reopens the Strait of Hormuz and allows ships to pass safely.
Okay, well, that seems to have cleared it up. So we'll see. We're going to see. This is going to be an interesting 2 weeks because one of the goals was to get rid. Well, one of them was to topple the leadership, and the other was to get rid of the enriched nuclear material. Those two goals remain unaccomplished. So we're gonna see. I don't think. I don't see. I don't see. I still don't know why we even. I still don't see goals accomplished. Says Grok says Iran has not agreed to I'm not gonna believe Grok. I'm gonna go with CNN for now. We'll see how it goes. But at least this way I won't feel guilty about not staying online until 8 o'clock tonight to see if Trump actually does it. So let's go back. We'll finish up. Let these two quote conservatives finish up, and then I have one more item of interest, and we will wrap this up for the night because I need to still make dinner. And by the way, dinner, it's going to be fried rice. I'm going to make homemade fried rice. I've actually put rice into the refrigerator to chill and dry. And then I'm going to, I think it's going to be like ham fried rice or something like that. What's all over Twitter Speak Radio? That's right. It's been a while since I've made fried rice. I've got the stir-fry vegetables. No, it's just going to be white rice. It's leftover jasmine rice. I've never actually made fried brown rice. I've had it before. It's actually pretty good. I think I have some brown rice. Next time I'll try that. Yeah, we covered that ceasefire for 2 weeks. Yeah, it's like white on rice there, Kelvin.
Shows up in totally different contexts and situations. And it's connected to a bunch of challenges. We don't have time to list them. I'll come back. But a bunch of challenges that are just completely different from the situation in which movement conservatism took shape. And it doesn't mean that like a bunch of conservative ideas are all just going to go away. But it means that sort of the kind of populist nationalist turn it is just something that like you're going to be reckoning with it for a while, unless further stipulation, right? We get, the absolutely crazy AI revolution and politics is revolutionized in some further way. But in that case, too, I don't think you're sort of, that's not going to wind us backwards either.
No, I think
that's fair. There's a different, and again, whatever we're talking
You're
about.
basically taking the Beaconsfield position from Whitaker Chambers.
That's exactly
No,
what
I'm serious.
doing.
That's very much what you're doing. It's just fine. It's a very respectable position.
I would just, my last comment is just that this doesn't mean that a kind of a principled view that says Reagan was basically right and the three-legged stool is still the best mode of politics and whatever you want, however you want to define the conservative movement, that just disappears. It doesn't disappear, and it may be right and correct and worth defending, but it is negotiating its position. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It will be negotiating its position in a way that is very different from how it was negotiating its position in the Gingrich era or the Tea Party era.
From consensus to faction is a fair point.
Yeah. I think that's what to the extent I was like giving advice. I got some, the Mike Pence people really didn't like that essay because I of treated them. But, if I'm giving advice to like the Mike Pence people, don't stand up and say, we represent conservatism and this is what conservatism is. Like, because that's just clearly not where we are. You are a faction inside conservatism and you are fighting, building alliances, negotiating, and that's the world you're in. That's all.
I have many notes. We will have you back.
Or you're a remnant. You might say you're a remnant, but I think that I think you've always been comfortable with the idea that sort of the most principled form of conservatism could become politically irrelevant for a while.
For sure.
And sometimes that happens too.
I mean, as a devout
under the robots,
Christian, as a devout Christian, you have to have your own version of that view.
I think there are many worlds in which my preferred set of political commitments ends up feeling totally irrelevant, and honestly, the second Trump term, the way the second Trump term has worked out, some of the directions that populism have gone, like away from it's sort of the Christian conservative version, away from those have made some of my own religious conservative commitments feel at a remove from the place where American politics is being contested, let's say. Nobody's talking about abortion, as you may have noticed.
I have noticed.
The year of our Lord, 2026.
Except Ramesh Panero. All right, my friend. Thank you very much for being here. We will have you back. I have notes. I have to go say goodbye. My daughter is leaving for the airport. You have things to do. You have
so many things. Thank you, Jonah. This was fun. And hopefully by the time it airs, all will have been resolved.
We will live in an era of clarity. Yeah,
that's right. All right. Take care.
All right. Ross Douthat has left the studio, and that didn't exactly go according to plan, but I thought the conversation was sufficiently interesting and on the news and poorly timed because by the time this comes out, events will have matured or changed or deteriorated in such a way that, it may seem like a quaint tidbit from a bygone era, but who knows? And we will revisit the reason I wanted to have him on in the first place. The next time he comes on, hopefully, we can talk about the future of conservatism and the right. And but it's always fun to talk to Ross. And we'll put links to the columns that we were talking about in the show notes. And thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
When are we going to have a conversation about Asian supremacy? That's right. Y'all Negroes keep talking about white supremacy this and white supremacy that. I've been looking at data and statistics for years and years and years. And one thing I keep noticing is that Asians are either number one on these lists or they're at the very bottom. They're number one in wealth. They're number one in income. They're number one in education. When it comes to teen birth rates, they're very low. But marriage, all the way at the top. Asian marriages last longer than other people's. They're at the very bottom of crime. These things should tell us something. While we're sitting here, whites, blacks, bickering with one another about who had it worst or who has it best, who held who back, the question you got to ask yourself is, what are Asians doing behind the scenes in politics? They must be pulling some political strings. They must be paying someone somewhere under the table to have all these things. If systemic racism is a problem, then they've got it all sewed up. How do they do this? You don't see them sitting in the presidency. You don't see them in Congress, really. How are they able to maintain all these numbers when they don't have these positions of power that so many people are concerned about? I guess that's why nobody's going.
Yeah, this is this came across my my algorithm. I actually subscribed to this guy's channel recently. Apparently he's a MAGABlack or something like that. This is really the only second video I've ever seen. Now, a couple years ago now, I talked about, Asians, it was half a joke, but it actually, I was also half serious that, Vivek Ramaswamy kind of said the same, he was in that vein about American mediocrity. Basically said, and I hurt John Galt's feelings, and I probably hurt HB's feelings when I said, hey, I'm raising my son to compete with the Asians. The whites are basically number 2 right now. Their day is over. It's Asian excellence that black parents need to be raising their children to meet. And in my opinion, I am prescient. Okay, we need to be taking, marriage seriously. We need to be taking family seriously. We need to be taking education seriously. These are all things that, Asians in general seem to do, at least if the statistics are to be believed. The only thing I don't agree with is the white supremacy point that this guy is trying to make. I don't agree with that for several reasons, but let's let him finish.
After them because they can't be racist, right? That can't be a reason for them being at the top. I'm kind of being funny about all of this, but the reason I am is because black people, we seem so laser focused on what white people are doing and how white people are oppressing and holding people back. How come they couldn't prevent themselves from being number 8 on the income list under 7 other groups? If they've got everything on lock with systemic control,
Yeah, this guy doesn't quite get it. Okay, even though Asians are number 1, they are a very small minority. Okay, if you go and you look at Congress, you don't see a whole bunch of Asians there. This guy doesn't seem to understand that systemic racism is more than just political control. It's cultural control too. And if you haven't noticed, people like Amy Wax and people like her, if she basically doesn't even want South and East Asians, she wants them out of the country and or basically the scholarships and all that stuff. She wants them all out. What do you think this whole H-1B kerfuffle that Elon Musk and Steve Bannon quarreled over? It was because of Asians. Okay, so this guy is either uninformed, which I suspect he is, or he's just ignoring the fact that whites have cultural control. This whole white replacement theory, he's unaware, apparently. Asians don't want political power. They just want to do well. I have a friend of mine who is South Asian, and he and I, over the past few years have talked about Hinduism specifically. Hindus do not like the limelight. They like flying under the radar. As long as their families are doing well and their kids are doing well in school, and their doctors, lawyers, engineers, that sort of thing, they don't give a shit about political power. They care about their test scores and they care about meritocracy, but they don't care about the flashy cars and the getting elected to Congress and stuff like that. It's a cultural thing. And this guy would do well to have an Asian friend or two to explain it to him, because he's off base as far as the white supremacy point. I think he's right about blacks need to stop caring about, what whites are doing. They need to refocus and figure out how Asians, such a small minority of Asians, are doing so well. And by the way, if you go and you look at Asians, there's a hierarchy there. Get Crack has talked about it, where the Japanese are kind of like at the apex of the hierarchy, and then it goes down from there. There is a hierarchy in the quote Asian community as well. By the way, it surprised me that Filipinos are number 2, at least as far as income goes. That did surprise me. So anyway, we'll let him finish out. This is what happens. He's smart for an anti-black. He's got a good point. He's beginning to get to a good point, but overall, this let's ignore white supremacy point, that's that Thomas Sowell bullshit, that Shelby Steele bullshit. No, because what is happening is you got Amy Waxes out there who want to shut down the Asian excellence too.
Systemic racism against black people. How come they're not doing it with Asians? How come they're not doing it with these other groups?
Okay, they are doing it with Asians. Okay, the only reason there was an Asians for fair admissions thing is because the white girl that they tried to do it, they tried to get affirmative action taken out in the courts, but the white girl that was their test case didn't make it. I can't remember exactly why, but it really didn't make it past the appeals court. The Asians basically were a good candidate. And the reason they're not trying to get the Asians out is because it's such a small group of people, and Asians pretty much buy into white supremacy. And I'm not saying this, I'm not making this up. I have talked to mostly Indians. If you go to the internet, into YouTube, there are a couple shows that I watch occasionally. The Indians, there are these conservative Indians who buy into a quote Caucasian connection to Europeans, or is it Aryan? I can't remember, but there are Indians who basically say we are the ancestors of the Europeans. So we're in essence like we're in essence European too, because they are our progeny. There are plenty of Asians, especially South Asians, who buy into white supremacy. So that's why Asians buy into white supremacy. That is why they aren't prime targets. Let an Asian be a leftist, like I forget her name. She's like a council member or something, or a Rokana. Let an Asian not buy into white supremacy and they become targets too. Again, this guy is misinformed, uninformed, or not looking at the right shows or the right places. It just so happens I have friends on the West Coast in the San Francisco area, and I kind of keep up with Asian affairs vicariously.
Who are kicking their ass, literally, in a lot of areas. So the question we have to ask ourselves is it really
What's up, Bobby?
worth it to be complaining and sitting here worrying about systemic racism and what white people are oppressing on a day-to-day basis? Some of you people are too laser focused on that shit, and I'm talking to black people specifically. Anyway, think about it. I'm out.
No more Yaza Baza.
And this guy's actually, I'll drop his link. It's called Consider Culture. And Kelvin, your Asian experience is totally different than the Asian experience in the United States. So I'm not whistling Dixie or guessing about my take. I have friends, like I said, and we have talked at length about. As a matter of fact, I've even been on Clubhouse. I've been on Clubhouse channels with these people. So I'm not whistling Dixie. You don't have to know about the take. Your experience in Britain, in London, in England is different than what's going on like in the Bay Area and that sort of thing. So I'm going to drop this guy. He's got a fairly large channel. He's got 9,000 subscribers. So I would recommend it. From what I've seen, he's got some interesting takes, fairly conservative, not stuff that I would buy into, but at least he's relatively on point. You know, it's not like John Galt bad. And let's see, where are we? We are coming up on 4 hours. I have a friend of mine, Megabyte. I'll see. He's been on my show way back in the John Galt days. I'm going to see if I can't get him up on the channel maybe one Saturday to talk about this. Again, I'm not guessing. He lives in the Bay Area. He is South Asian. He went to Berkeley. He is plugged into this sort of stuff. So that is that. This is kind of like the last call. If anybody wants to hit the link and say hello, if that is not the case, then we can wrap this up because I'm coming up on 4 hours. And actually kind of enjoyed myself. This is probably the most politics I've talked in any one show in quite some time. Hence the low numbers. You know, I saw all the Sin 7 sins and everybody comes cycling through, and politics is never a big draw. Apparently JP got arrested or some bullshit like that. So, you know, people have been buzzing about it all day. I'm not even remotely interested in what JP does or whether he gets arrested or not. Nope, not drinking today, Bobby. Haven't really had the chance. So too late. And speaking of that, tomorrow is Wednesday. The Sovereign Beer Fund will be putting out the IPO, building up the stock and the donations and the investments towards this weekend show. Again, no idea what it'll be about, but something will come up. And that seems to be it. Nobody seems to be clicking the link. JP is a pillar of the Black community. Which Black community? Not my Black community. He lives up in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Waukesha, somewhere like that. So maybe he's a pillar of his community. But there are many Black communities who would actually never accept a JP. JP would not be accepted in many Black communities across the. Oh, you know what? I really ought to play this because this kind of fits in with, but it's 20 minutes and it'll probably be more in line. Now, I'm going to save it for tomorrow because we're going to talk a little bit about the manosphere. There's a manosphere documentary that Louis Theroux did. It's on Netflix. And he did an interview with Kara Swisher. And I've got like 3 videos lined up. One is why Black voters aren't leaving Trump. That's a Coleman Hughes thing. Louis Theroux exposes the manosphere. And then conservative women are leaving the new right and they're pissed. So those will be on tap for tomorrow. Don't really have time or the fortitude. So that's it. No takers. So I am going to wrap this up here. Tell your friends about the wonderful show we had today. If you catch this on a replay, please make sure that you leave, you hit the like button and leave comments. They're always welcome. And I had a good time, talked some politics, got to do some really awesome Trump bashing. It's been a good day. Any day I can bash MAGA and make MAGABlack jokes. And this MAGA, the title of the show, MAGABlack, is YN Anthropology. I think it was Natasha who made the YN Anthropology joke. So it has been a successful day. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. I will see everybody tomorrow afternoon, round about 3 o'clock or so. And we will talk manosphere and Black Trump voters. It's just going to be a real hootenanny. So everybody have a very good night. See you all tomorrow.